of urban households to the electricity grid ramped up, along with repeated scandals on pricing. In the slums, I noticed more tapping into the main lines. Did authorities receive kickbacks to look the other way? Maybe, maybe not. I have to admit, urban energy was better. Charcoal use in the cities reduced and some forest areas were recovering. However, rural areas and city slums were suffering. Where large projects were built, people were forced to move or left because life was too hard. The focus was on industry and urban areas, not rural agriculture. I remember the region's grand gala of 2030, when the last link of the Eastern Africa power pool was actualized. Then, we were exporting oil and manufacturing grew rapidly. Despite my earlier doubts, people are getting jobs and lives are getting better.
See? The great development dream is working.
By the end of the 2030s, would the dream turn out to be merely a mirage?
For a while there, things looked really good on the energy front.
I always feared it was too good to be true. When the deal makers planned their coal and oil projects, they forgot about climate change or assumed it would only be a problem much later. Instead, because our exports were produced using fossil fuels, they became more expensive to cover the global carbon tax. So people stopped buying our goods. We couldn't sell our oil either, as many countries made a quick switch to electric and hybrid vehicles. Our manufacturing industries could not compete with the robotic factories abroad. We just hadn't kept up technologically. Many businesses shut down, many people were unemployed. Crime rose in the cities until we rarely left our neighborhoods because of fear. Then there was the weather.
Bad policy is ruining farms in our region.
It's more than policy. The climate itself has become an enemy. In the countryside, it was hard to know when to sow or when to reap. Should farmers plan for drought or floods? It was hard to know. The swings between extremes were becoming more and more violent. Pollution was also increasing, especially around the factories where waste was being pumped into groundwater and streams. By the time our children were ready for university, the digital economy was the main employer and dominated by the youth.
Seems our energy investments are paying off, with the digital world being a heavy user of power.
True, but the carbon tax is forcing other businesses to close. And what about all the money we borrowed to pay for our dirty energy? How can we pay that back? As for hydropower, climate change, deforestation, haphazard rain and silt have all reduced the power the dams gave us. Now we are dependent on Ethiopia's large dams for our electricity. That is very hard to handle. The international grid once brought the region together. Now we feel frustrated and resentful whenever the prices go up. A few days ago, I dug out my notes about small-scale distributed energy systems. Once, it was just an idea. Now, these systems are used worldwide. These energy systems would have created a more equitable society.
Are you sure you're not dreaming?
Perhaps I am. I hate the world around me. I hate being trapped in my middle-class neighborhood. I am surrounded by complacent people who believe they made their own success. I hate the bad policies, the energy systems we built in the 2020s, and the corruption we tolerated. We just got lucky in a rigged system. I've stopped arguing with my husband about this. We know each other too well now. My children, they mostly ignore me. Too comfortable to think deeply about anyone less fortunate. But I still whisper in the ears of my students. Resistance is an instinct that never goes away. One day, things will be forced to change because too many are suffering. Be ready for the next revolution.
Things were looking up. Not only had I just received my master's in journalism, one of the region's best brains had chosen to mentor me. I was ready for the good things in life. At work, I eventually got posted to the environment desk. As I traveled, I began to notice that the weather pattern was changing. Too hot and dry, or too rainy and flooded. But my monthly highlight was the meetings with the professor who was mentoring me. Prof, as I would call him, would buy lunch and I would bring my articles. Then we'd analyze what was happening in the region. His sharp mind turned me into a believer in markets, in their efficiency, their dynamism, and their ability to transform societies. Prof and I were to write a book in 2050. It was supposed to be the story of how Eastern Africa became the economic powerhouse of the continent. But the story didn't turn out exactly the way we thought it would. Even as I worked on environmental stories, energy remained the biggest buzz, with new technologies, new ideas, new money, and its stories came at us with every extreme weather event or episode of volatile energy prices. I loved discussing these stories at our monthly lunches. Prof was deeply invested in finding coherent energy plans, but our leaders didn't seem interested in creating any policies. That disinterest proved disastrous with the 2025 financial crash. The rich nations were the first to go down, but we were all living on borrowed money. We looked to our leaders for guidance, but most quietly served their terms, or simply resigned and dodged accountability. My stories about the environment were increasingly dominated by climate change, as it became a frightening reality everywhere. That forced people to give the Paris Climate Agreement stronger legal force and accelerated a shift to low-carbon energy systems. Exceptional turmoil brought more security forces into our region, which destabilized global oil prices, speeding up the shift to electric vehicles in the rich world. It was an exciting time to be a journalist, but a scary time to be a citizen of this region. We were just waiting, wondering, drifting. Before the crash, prospectors had been looking in Africa for minerals needed by clean energy technologies. They had quietly staked their claims, but now the invasions began. The first invasion was the clean energy and natural gas companies, ready to exploit their mineral rights or find new ones. You see, huge loans initially taken by our governments to fund fossil projects that are now obsolete had to be paid up. The easiest way out was for our governments to accept huge payouts offered by rich nations. But there was a catch to their offer. The rich nations in return took our minerals and rare earth metals for their own renewable technology investments. Well, it seemed like mere barter exchange, but on face value, we were the biggest losers. The second invasion was agricultural lands. Prof and I considered land a commodity like everything else. If the foreigners will pay for it, Let them do so, or so we thought. I wrote the stories of tycoons and corporations paying our governments large sums to develop fertile land in remote areas of our countries. But sooner or later, our farmers were forced to sell out or move, unable to compete with these commercial farms. The third invasion was companies exploiting the new carbon markets. Creative local investors in Eastern Africa had found new ways to use a global carbon market to reward our people who restored degraded lands or protected healthy habitats. Eventually, our local companies were taken over by the international traders. The results? Financial profits went to foreigners who focused on the climate emergency and dismissed local needs and cultural traditions. I saw my people lose control of their forests and land. The fourth invasion was exporting electrical power. Our development plans called for more manufacturing, but there was little industry in the region. As a result, the large-scale power projects in hydro, gas, solar and wind built in the 2020s were now producing more electricity than Eastern Africans could consume or afford. But there is a ready market for clean power in North Africa and Europe. The power companies of our region connected their excess power to the European grid using ultra-high voltage lines provided by China. As our power went north, everyone on the deal earned valuable clean energy credits that could be sold for profit or used to meet the Paris Agreement's targets. Prof was delighted to see the EAPP back in business. But it wasn't due to any great regional corporation. Instead, this was market-driven by companies in Europe and North Africa buying Eastern Africa's power. So much electricity left the region that local people were still unable to have the light and power they needed. Only major African businesses and wealthy households could afford it. Local people objected, but government leaders just saw good deals, new incomes, reduced deficits, and a more comfortable life for themselves. Any downside was just the price of development. Time and circumstance were not sympathetic to oil and coal, and by 2040, both had faded from our energy systems. Many of the big oil projects I wrote about in such excitement in those early days never took off or were half-built and then abandoned. Now it was time to face the long-term consequences of the 4 invasions of minerals, agricultural land, carbon markets, and power exports. The evolution of Eastern Africa's energy system moved in 2 very different directions. In one, there was a large-scale clean energy revolution, a world of global business serviced by a low-carbon economy and energy system, efficiently meeting the needs of those ready to accept and pay for what it delivers. It was Prof's dream come true. The other system is a mishmash of whatever works. The poorest can no longer afford any of it. Many of these people have been pushed out of their land in rural areas and even in cities. Slums are strung with dangerous and illegal electric wires. The working poor cope with cheap solutions, solar and wind installations that rarely work long enough to pay off the debts used to buy them. They rely on charitable efforts to give them more efficient wood stoves or create methane gas from urban sewage and toilets. They rarely succeed. For the middle class, there are multiple renewable energies on offer, including a few local technologies that show promise. Most renewables are small-scale and off-grid, rarely integrated with each other. Some work well, Others are cheap second-hand technologies from other continents. The weak ones rarely last. Frankly, we're nothing but a dumping site for obsolete and shoddy goods, from cars to solar panels. Good business for the middlemen, but not for buyers. The global energy transition to a low-carbon world is thriving in 2050. But here in our region, the transition is not working for most people. All these changes and invasions have created a queer patchwork across the land. I have pictures of the ugly scars of mining operations, areas barren of indigenous plants, birds, and animals. We are biologically impoverished, with a wealth of Eastern African life reduced to an ancient, magical mythology. I have pictures showing vast grey areas where shanties spill out of the old city centres, next to wealthier neighbourhoods boasting a rich garden green canopy. And I have contrasting pictures of rural areas with tidy crops parcelled out in neat lines. The rivers here are often a bright sterile green of fertilized algae which sucks out the oxygen fish need. All these busy enterprises have private security firms keeping order and reducing theft. They say it's necessary to keep our own people safe. So who counts as our own people? My last discussions with Prof kept asking this question. We'd joked that all our fellow Africans who run these businesses are like the old colonial tribal chieftains. They control the land and decide who gets which benefits. They've signed the international agreements that handed our region over to outsiders, even though our ancestors taught us to liberate ourselves and control our own destiny. As for workers and professionals, we learned to be docile and had seen enough violence not to want any more. Many of us want to leave, but where can we go? Who will take us in? So that's the book. Our world is enjoying this fragile new world order, this development. Me, I find it hard to celebrate what I now see.
So, where do I start? Well, I remember when my wife would want to leave the city while I'd want to stay. Then we'd switch. But eventually we agreed and left. The marvels of the city had worn thin with overcrowding and pollution. So, we moved to a smaller town where life was easier, cheaper, and we could make a bigger impact and do something that matters. We quickly found out how different life was. There were barely any services, such as water, electricity, or security. But there was a robust community. Despite the connections not being very legal, everyone here worked with their neighbors and formed networks to meet their needs. Sometimes, those connections weren't exactly legal, but we had no option. Eventually, we adjusted. My wife, who used to work at the Ministry of Health, found her place first, working at the local clinic as a volunteer, then with the local council helping translate national policies into workable solutions on the ground. Since I used to work at the Ministry of Energy, I began a small solar business. This was inspired by my children who needed dependable power to access the internet. Then, success. We brought electricity to our children's school, and the school sponsor fully bought in and set up an energy fund. It proved that renewable energy could challenge the bigger pay-as-you-go companies, which weren't as affordable as they seemed. While not everyone was supportive, I didn't expect a big fight from the central government, who accused me of undermining the energy providers to our region. One day, the central government cut off a neighborhood I had wired up with renewable electricity. The local people, both young and old, protested in such numbers that it made the national news. Progress was hard, but worth it. With time, we realized that nothing was off the table, especially when the government was not able to help us. The unreliable weather meant we had to find new crops and grow different types of food. In my renewables business, we were now selling energy to local computer servers as well as households. Energy storage had improved a lot, but a mix of technologies was still more reliable. Solar, wind, biogas, with some backup fossil fuels. Despite the hard times, young people were thriving as masters of the digital world, using it to provide the social glue, circulate information, and help with payment systems. Raw determination and rapid learning was the rule, supported by laughter in the face of frequent and frightening hazards. These shocks affected everyone, making the role of the national government clear, including cooperation and policies in the region and the world. But when times were getting harder and we needed the government's help, it was hard to find. My wife passed away. Our last born also fell very ill. A new epidemic was killing us by the thousands. I wanted to believe that better times lay ahead, but I had no idea what better meant anymore. The epidemic eventually subsided. Our last born got better. But the blow of losing my wife was really hard to get over. It was difficult to adjust to this new normal. I began to think a lot more about the legacy I wanted to leave and decided to hand over my energy business to my children. It was an interesting time because many of the bigger energy projects were declining, opening up the space for smaller energy systems like ours. Low demand and production glut for oil drove down its price. Coal-fired power plants were killed off by enforcement of carbon prices. Also, many of the big dams were struggling. Building the Eastern Africa power pool proved difficult. As most of the old power projects became white elephants, gas and geothermal became the most reliable of the remnants of the central grid. The situation reminded me of a hyrax. It looks like a large rodent, but its closest relative is the elephant. In the energy world, the white elephants were slowly shuffling off the scene, while the small, nimble hyrax were increasing in number like the many small-scale technologies that run the microgrids and district energy systems of the region. That was the inspiration behind our business name, Hyrax Energy Solutions. We were growing because we were more technologically suited to the dispersed populations of our time. My youngest daughter, the one who barely survived the epidemic that took her mother, has now decided to run for office. She wants to make central government effective again. This new generation amazes me. As children of hard times, they used their education and pragmatism to find opportunities in this unpredictable world. They understood that clean air, not energy, is the scarce resource of our times. We are still battered by weather and unusual diseases. But have things improved? I think so. We have more control over our own affairs. Scientists say that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is no longer increasing, but others fear climatic change cannot be stopped because we began too late. Around our town, firewood and charcoal use has reduced, with many households resorting to electricity and biogas stoves. The big energy projects still function, but much of their power goes into transport where it's harder to replace oil. I still miss my wife. We fled to this town so many years ago. Now, I cannot remember what our life was like before. It became home in every sense. I'm proud of our small contribution towards a hybrid economy and mixed energy systems. We had no plan. We just started with what was there and what was needed. Now see how far we've come, eh?
Thank you very much for watching that. We can talk about it over dinner and online. If you have any comments, those would be most welcome. I'm now going to hand over to Iman, who's going to be introducing the launch of Energy for What. This is, in effect, the next big project that followed the scenarios, and we have panels ready for you, and we'll take it from there. So, Iman.
Thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon, everyone. Those joining us online, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Iman Bashir. I work with PowerShift Africa, and I'm going to be introducing why we're here today, why the online audience is watching, and the entire concept that we're here to be introduced to. So as was explained, the Energy for Whom report was launched 2 years ago, and the report has been followed up with videos that made it very easy for us to understand and follow. And one thing that all the groups and from both sides of the conversations around energy agree on is that for East Africa to join the global ranks of development and economy, a sound energy system is core. I think we all agree on that. Now, what type of energy is what we need to understand. And majority of the people who are at the grassroots level, the individuals who are most impacted, do not follow this conversation, unfortunately. They don't understand hii energy ni ya nini. What is this energy for? So that's what this the report, the publication today is trying to understand, to help them understand, to explain the question as to why accessibility may not be accessibility, why proximity to an energy line may not mean you have access to energy. So the team attempted to explain this very fundamental issue in a way that is easy to follow. That's a very important challenge when it comes to energy conversations, is that the engineers will come with a tech, the environmentalists will yell climate change and global warming. The electricians will have their own conversation. The government comes in, and all these conversations are technical and complex, and the common mwananchi cannot follow. So the point of this, you'll see the report, it's very colorful, very easy to follow, and maybe I'm biased to graphs and pie charts, but it was very easy to understand and digest the information. So with that, I'll introduce some of the conversations that the compendium attempts to explain the perspectives of urban and rural households when it comes to energy. The report will walk you through the energy-related policy, as well as the gaps within those policies and the relevance to the common mwananchi. It also outlines the challenges of well-established stances, such as biomass. It also challenges, is renewable energy really the golden goose? It explains all of these, conversations that we throw around, because as maybe experts, we understand them more soundly than people who don't. So with that, I will leave it to those who can say more important things in better ways. First, I'll introduce someone who's joining us virtually, Arthur Muliro, the Deputy Managing Director for Society for International Development, to deliver his keynote speech. Arthur?
Thank you, Man, for that introduction. Good afternoon to all of you out there in Naivasha, and to all of those who are joining virtually. This has been a long journey for us at SID, and it has been a great pleasure to accompany all of those who have been part of this long journey. In many respects, the publication that you're about to receive today highlights its commitment to dialogue. and we hope that it will provide information, insights. It will inspire us to imagine new possibilities, but more importantly, to engage. And this engagement that we're looking for, I think, is an engagement that is trying to push us towards getting to a position whereby we can make the dream of energy justice and having a just transition that moves us towards a sustainable energy future more of a reality. These are words that are being thrown around quite a lot in these days. We talk about energy justice. What does that mean? We talk about just transition, sustainable energy. What does that mean? In the past couple of days, you've had some conversations where we've looked at the nuances that are involved here. We've looked at some of the links that are critical to make these transitions happen, whether they be finance, whether they be linked to the changes in climate, whether they be linked to the other sectors that are necessary to be engaged in this process. In all of this, we all agree that energy is a key development driver, and whichever way we look at it, whichever way we want to cast our development goals and ideas, without energy, we are not going to achieve much of that. And I hope that with this publication, Energy for What, we can begin to have new conversations. And these new conversations, I hope, will not be simply rehashing the disagreements of the past or the dreams that have been pitched to us. I think many of you will recognize that, if you're a certain age, certainly in Kenya, you will know that we've had continually, every other decade, there have been promises that we would get, we'd reach a certain level of development, we'd have a certain level of infrastructure, we'd have a certain level of energy. None of these have been achieved. Okay, that's fine, but let us at least interrogate why we have not been able to achieve some of these goals and begin to have new conversations where we can understand what the gaps have been, what the new opportunities are, and what are the nuances that we need to appreciate much, much more critically. But above all, I hope that this publication, Energy for What, is really an inspiration for us to begin to understand the energy system. What is it that actually brings everything that we need together, so that we can learn together, not just as energy technicians, or as Siman was saying a few minutes ago, in little silos where it's the technicians working together, the finance people working together, the activists agitating alone, but we can work together to try and understand the system and to build new coalitions that can lead to a transformative change. As I said, this has been a long journey that has involved many people. And I would like at the get-go to appreciate the role that our partner in this process has played. Without the Heinrich Böll Stiftung being with us, I don't think we would have achieved much of what we've been able to achieve today with what you've seen, the conversations, the animations, and now the research compendium, Energy for What. In particular, I'd like to pay tribute to great friend and colleague, Fred Njau, and also the leadership at the Heinrich Böll Foundation, in particular, Joachim Paul, the current director, and his predecessor, Ulf Linden, who we also had the great opportunity to work with and to do this. There's also been within SID, my colleagues who have very ably and capably taken this line of work, and I think have delivered a great retreat and launch. Pasi, who is also virtual, but very much present. Emily Karanja, Crispus, Onkoba, Lynn, and not in the group here today, but who has also played a very critical role, Peter Otieno, who has been, the guy in the shadows, making sure that everything came together. And of course, we wouldn't have this publication without the authors. There are too many to mention, but you know yourselves. Thank you very much for your efforts and your contribution. When we began the process of trying to put together this compendium, of course, we had an idea, we had a vision. And what surprised us was just how many people were willing to jump in and to share their ideas and insights, which also then speaks to the fact that there is a nascent conversation that needs to happen. There are people who want to engage on these issues of energy, justice, of how we can have a sustainable energy transition in our country. And I think we should not run away from the opportunity. Rather, we should find ways in which we can make these conversations happen. So thank you to all the authors, to the members of the Energy Reference Group, who have also been very, very critical in pushing us at SID to keep convening these sessions and to keep engaging on the topics that we have engaged with over the past year and a half. Even in times of COVID, the energy didn't slack. We simply moved to a virtual platform, and I think that has also been very, very inspirational. And last but not least, I mean, a good friend and somebody I think who has also in very many ways driven and shaped this initiative in ways that we wouldn't have imagined. Barbara Heinzen, with whom I've had the honor, privilege, and the pleasure of working with for the past 2 decades, who has been a really, really critical force behind the this energy for whom, energy for what sort of conversations. She has also, in many ways, converted us to believe that we need to, focus on these things and not just take them as topics or headlines that should just catch our attention for a few seconds and then move on. So, and just to wrap up, I'd just like to say that I hope when you look at this publication, you take it for what it is. It is a contribution that tries to demystify the story of energy in our country, hopefully also in the region. It tries to clarify pathways and plans for the future. It has many ideas. I don't think that it is the final word, but it is certainly something that tries to get the conversations going. We have also tried to focus pretty much on the human element, because energy for what? I think in previous years, we've focused a lot on energy being for industrialization, for transportation, but the whole part of the clean cooking and the energy for the human side of it has taken second fiddle in all of this. Let's also focus on that. And I hope that this publication brings out some of those dilemmas, some of the opportunities there. And I believe that it also tries to go beyond the technical and the financial, because these are critical things I think that we need also to appreciate and embrace. For far too long, energy has been parked as something that is largely technical or financial, and therefore the ordinary mwananchi had not much to say other than to pay their bills and keep lamenting that the energy costs were going up. Well, let's have a different conversation. Let's see if we cannot make this energy transformation process about us. And so I hope that this publication challenges us to do something. You will see it. It's a nice, hefty publication. I hope that it is not going to be used as a doorstop or as a decoration. As Iman said, it's very colorful and very nice to look at. But beyond that, it has also got very, very many critical and useful ideas, which I hope that we will be able to engage with and to further the conversations that we need to have. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the conversations as the launch goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Like I said, more important things and in better ways. Next up, I'd like to invite the partners for this project who, like Arthur said, were not only fundamental in the process, but also were great supporters from the beginning to the very end. I'd like to now invite Wahim Paul, the country director for the Heinrich Böll Foundation, to come right up to deliver his speech. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Iman. Thank you very much, Arthur. Thanks everybody who is here and everybody who is out there joining us online. It's for me, it's a great pleasure to be here. Arthur mentioned us already, the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, and our contribution to this journey that stretched over a few years. And I think we're coming to an end here of a long project, a successful end with this publication and the animations that we have seen that are published now and that go online and reach hopefully a huge audience. So I came in at the end of this journey so far. It's only a few months for me to be here. It is Fred who will speak after me and represent the Heinrich Böll Stiftung as well here, and also my predecessor Ulf Terlinden, who I think both were very much involved in this cooperation and the activities, putting together the energy reference group, the people who we meet here. And maybe we should say again, I know it has been so often said, unfortunately, it's only the small group that can meet here. Honestly, I have no idea who is out there joining us over Zoom, because we don't see the participants who join online. But I know the chat is active and there will be contributions and questions and etc. So this is good. It's a much larger group. Unfortunately, we're not able today to meet in person here. And talking about the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, you know, we're the Green Foundation. So green in our program very much stands for energy, clean energy, energy transition, transition to a future that is free of fossil fuel and other factors that are harmful to like a holistic path of development. So it is at the heart of our program and what we're usually doing to advocate for this energy transition. And but what we're actually talking about here is not that much the technical aspect. Obviously, the technical aspects are important. We need to know which technologies are there, which energy pathways can be developed. We need to know that and understand that. But what we're talking about here is involving larger audiences into the conversation. So to take the conversation out of the corner or niche of experts, interest groups, lobbyists, and to involve the broader public. And I think we can say, especially among the broader public, young people. It is very important, I think, and I'm very happy to see many young faces here. So, enthusiastically participating in the discussion and in the debates and in the writing contests, or the writing contest, for example, great essays that we have the chance to read there. So I think this is the dynamic of this project and those activities, and this is where it should be going, to reach a broader public, to engage many young people into the conversation. Probably there will be a lot of storytelling and making clean future energy a subject of discussion in the digital world. I do think so. I hope the animations will be distributed widely. We have seen them before, of course, when we were reviewing the draft versions. So to imagine the future, and that's obviously something that young people are doing. I think it's interesting to see the scenarios that are laid out there and how much they will actually happen, or hopefully not happen in the way they were portrayed, in the negative way. So so we are, as Heinrich Böll Stiftung, we're happy to have been part of this process. we're happy to be here. And my colleague Fred, who has been involved for so long with you, the participants here in the room, and I think many others of the authors of the Energy for What publication, and of course our partner SID, will say a few words, because who could do this better from our side than Fred, who has been involved over the years. So thank you very much, everybody here. Thank you very much, everybody there online, and a special thanks to the authors who contributed to this wonderful publication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joachim. And I think you almost said what everything, what I needed to say. I didn't have any speech prepared, but courtesy of that I've been in this process for the last 5 years, I think it's only good that I say a few words. Because when SID approached us in 2016, we didn't know what these scenarios, planning. And Arthur, came and introduced the idea we could actually think about the future, and it's not about a future about 10 years, even it's about 50 years to come. And we said, why not try it? And we had this special fund. Actually, it wasn't within our program, but we had a special fund we called Climate Fund. And we said, okay, we're going to try this out. And luckily, we had an expert in us, Barbara, and thank you very much. When we did the first retreat in Lukenya, we didn't know where to start, but Barbara made it easier for all of us. So what I'm saying is it has been a great journey for the last 5 years. Even having different workshops in Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, I think it was an eye-opener of how people relate on issues of energy. And I must say, all these questions are very political. And as you are aware, as a Green Political Foundation, these are matters within our heart. So I would also want to thank the SID team. I think they have been very, very, very engaged in this process over the last 5 years. Of course, not without challenges. Would have liked to see the ERG being more vocal, like we always say, we said on Monday, but always there are always these challenges of trying to bring groups together. It's great to see such a product of Energy for What, after asking a question before on Energy for Whom. And I think over the year, when the papers were presented, for those who got a chance to listen during the virtual sessions that happened throughout the year, I think we had a deeper understanding of what the papers meant. But again, this is another opportunity. As you can see, the publication has graph data. Unfortunately, Tony is not here. I don't know if he is online, but Tony Watima, wherever you are, I also want to say thank you for, I think it hasn't been easy to gather data. Always he came back with a lot of frustrations. I've tried to get this data from Kenya, wherever. Do you call it Kenya Bureau of Standards? No. Kenya Bureau of Statistics, yes. And it was always frustrating, but Tony didn't give up. And I think you'll find the most current data, if I may be confident to say so, in this publication. And I think it will be useful for the next several years before it may be another publication come in place. I would already encourage most of us to share it as much as possible. I did say we make plans to separate the different papers so that they can be shared independently, so that many people, if they want to read only one paper, maybe on climate change, thank you, Martin, you're here. So they would pull that one out and read on climate change. And various other authors who are here, thank you very much. You did a great job. But there are four questions that I try to ask myself in terms of even as an open question, even as we engage in this discussion. When for example, will all the rural or urban people be connected to electricity? I think that's a big question in the room. When will we all be connected? And if at all we are connected, is a question that we have all been asking ourselves, will we all afford that energy? And if we afford it even, whether the energy will be clean enough to take care of our climate, because the climate change is happening. Many people have a struggle to shift from less green biomass to less, climate dependent hydropower, to maybe a cleaner and more reliable solar, wind, and geothermal, which we all been discussing here. But in most cases, you'll find that there's always a mismatch between what the people want and what the governments are investing on. And that, I think that's where the politics comes in. And we need to try and hammer it into our people or the government that this mismatch between what people want and what they provide is what needs to change. So thank you very much for the audience today. And I look forward to the launch, also getting the publication and going it through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred and Joachim and Arthur. So now that we all have a general idea of why the report was necessary, what went into it, and who was behind it, I think maybe we can have more specific tone to the report. So I'll now direct you to panels that we've divided into 3 along different thematic areas. And that way you can get a better feel of the report, especially from the authors themselves, directly from the horse's mouth. So the first panel will be moderated by me. The second one will be moderated by my colleague, Ibrahim Jabri. And the third, you'll see my face again. And then we'll wrap up and we can maybe grab coffee and the people online can switch tabs. So the first, apologies, I put my foot in it. The first speaker, before we go to the panels, we'll have a few more comments from the people who are involved. First, I'd like to introduce someone who will be joining us virtually, Pasi Amayo, who was very closely involved in the report, who is also an author within the report, to share the story and the timeline behind the report before we go into specific comments from the editor. Pasi, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes. Yes, I can
All right.
hear you. Can you hear me? Hi,
yes,
everybody.
we can. Welcome.
Oh, wow. I mean, thank you. My name is Pasi Amayo-Gola, you probably all know, and welcome to everybody joining us online. I've been working with the SID team as part of the program team, implementing this project, as Fred said, actually for the past 6 years. So it's been a real journey, and I think I'm tasked today to share the journey that we've been on. But based on what Arthur, Joachim, and Fred have said, we've already had a longer overview of the journey. But let me just say maybe one thing or a few things that were missing. I mean, when we started this journey in 2016, it involved bringing a lot of people together and a lot of stakeholders together from different parts of the Eastern African region. As you have seen in the Energy for Whom, we focused on Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And this really involved pulling together policymakers in the energy space, civil society actors, actors in the academia, including private sector, but never ever leaving out the people who are most affected by the topics that we were discussing, which is energy poverty, energy justice, and even the dilemmas that come with the energy system within the region. So bringing this up, and we often say bringing the whole system in the room, led us into, number one, producing the Energy for Whom, the scenarios for Eastern Africa, which you have seen. And after that launch, we continue to have a lot of discussions, disseminating, engaging with different stakeholders, as we see how they can use the energy scenarios as a tool to inform decision-making at a personal level, but also at a commercial level and at a policy level when it comes to energy issues. And then it became very necessary to have a group that acts as a reference group when it comes to discussing energy issues. And that is really why we are convening here today. We first had such a convening in 2019, again in Naivasha, where we brought the whole system in the room to still discuss key energy issues and dilemmas that were core during 2019. And during that 2019 retreat is really where we said, let's have a place where we can consolidate all these issues, all these dilemmas, all the data that seems to be available in different sources and all say different things into one thing. And really the journey from the first retreat to the second retreat has been putting together this research, the consolidation of information, issues, and data into one place. We used to call it the Energy Atlas, but after the entire body of work was complete, working with the incredible authors that you will be able to interact with in their writing, and also who are members of the Energy Reference Group, you will see the diversity of ideas, perspectives, opinions, and the data that's coming out from different sources. Now, we wanted to focus on Kenya just to start with one particular location, but we hope the near future will allow us to delve into the other 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Tanzania as well, because at the end of the day, these countries are interlinked, and what's happening in a different country also affects what's happening in Kenya as a whole. I want to just say that I'm extremely proud, together with the team, that we've been able to reach this far. As my colleagues have already said, a huge appreciation to the Energy Reference Group members, to our partners, to the authors who are still members of the Energy Reference Group, and really everybody who's joining us and is going to continue to be part of this journey moving forward. I want to close my remarks at this point by bringing your attention to what Ban Ki-moon said in 2012 just before the Rio Plus 20 conference. And he said, energy is the golden thread that connects economic growth, social equity, and environmental sustainability. And when you go through this report, you begin to see the multifaceted nature of issues that surround energy and its development and how it affects other spheres of life. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the panels and the launch today. Back to you, Iman.
Thank you, Pasi. Apologies again for forgetting you. So I'd like to now welcome the next speaker, who has seen the report in all its glory, as well as in its very initial stages that she may not want us to see. Barbara Hensen, welcome.
Thank you, Iman. And yeah, when the first Energy Reference Group met here 2 years ago, we were saying, well, what can we do with this group? What can we do? They said, let's make an atlas. And I looked at them and I said, you must be out of your mind. An atlas is so much work. Do you know what you're trying to do? Do you know how hard it is? Don't even start. A few months later, Arthur phones me and says, would you be the editor of the Energy Atlas? So what do? I say yes. And as Pasi said, we thought it would be something small, and now it's something quite hefty. But what I really came to appreciate was, first of all, the tolerance of the writers for my editorship. At one point, we had a discussion. Do I just say to the authors, I don't like this, could you change it? Or do I take a panga to their text and say, // rewrite, do this, and say, if you don't like it, to hell with you. They said, take the panga, it's much quicker. So I was a panga style editor. And I really appreciate the fact that instead of the authors turning on me and saying, Barbara, you're just the meanest person in the world, they said this was really helpful. And I think the way the authors and I worked together was very, very constructive. And it helped me. And I think we have a much better book because of it. So just the style of working together was important. But I was asked to think about how do I reflect on what we did here? And I started thinking, well, that author did this bit and that one did that. And I thought, no, there are too many to name. But I wonder, Crispus or who's ever back in the back there, can you put up I had a few slides, if you can put those up, because there are 2 factual statistical slides that both Tony Watima and I played with, and we had problems with which data do we use and so forth. But yeah, that's the one. Thank you. And I was there for a minute. There's a pie. The first is a pie graph. That's it. And this is primary sources of energy in Kenya in 2019. That big green blob is 52% of the primary energy is biomass. That's 2019. In 2018, the statistics said we were getting 68%. No explanation for why the numbers changed. So somewhere between 52 and 68% of the energy that gets used in Kenya is still coming from biomass. That's why we say we're in a 19th century system. That's what we were using in Europe and North America in the 19th century. So we have that old system still functioning. And if you go to the next one, no, I can't, I've lost the thing. Can you give me a next page? This was a graph that took me a while to put together when we were looking at what's the price of energy. And what came across so clearly when you looked at the price of electricity versus the price of charcoal and the other fuels in between per kilowatt hour. Charcoal is 7 shillings per kilowatt hour and electricity was 24 shillings. No wonder we're using biomass. It's cheap. And charcoal is 7 shillings, but if you're going out to gather the wood, it's free. So how can you transform an energy system when these are the economics you're up against? That's the dilemma we're facing here. And if you can give me one last slide there, please, just give me, thank you. Yesterday, we went to the Olkaria geothermal plant. And it's vast, pipes running everywhere, wells all over the place. Each well, $5 to $10 million US dollars to drill. It's expensive. And it's a very clean source of reliable electricity. It's a base load for a modern world. But what's happening on the biomass side, which is what we're using, the trees are being hacked to death. Both those photographs were taken yesterday. So, and gathered wood only costs you the price of your labor. So you have a free resource, in inverted commas, versus a very expensive resource that's clean. So how do we reconcile these two things? The compendium tried to bring this dilemma into a single volume with all the dimensions that affect it. The climate dimension, the carbon price, the law, what's the new energy law telling us? What's the situation in Kibera? Pasi wrote a very good article about 70% of weekly income will be spent on energy. And that's for people who are living on $1 a day. What are we doing? How did we get things so wrong? Right? And where do we go from here? So those are the thoughts I had. And I think my biggest thanks is to the authors, not necessarily for what you wrote, but for putting up with me as an editor, as for being just such an old nag and saying, yeah, okay, yeah, I see that. That's fine. Thank you. And I think we've got a pretty good book. I think we can be proud of it. So thank you very much, authors. And thank you very much for Heinrich Boll and SID for giving me, can I call it an opportunity, the delightful burden of producing this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, for laying the ground for the next sessions, which are going to be the panels that I explained earlier. So for the first panel, I will be moderating. The panel is called Energy in People's Lives, and it puts together several articles within the report that all have the theme of the very grassroots level person who is affected by energy and whose voice is very rarely heard, but yet is a very important voice that should be heard. So I'd like to invite the panelists. We have 4 panelists today. And while they set up, maybe I can tell you a bit more about their reports. Pasi Amayo, who has just spoken, wrote an article called Popular Energy Knowledge in a Poor Nairobi Neighborhood. And she bases work in Kibera, where she did a very interesting system where she would hand the local households groundnuts. And she would tell them, out of these groundnuts, can you point what amount you use to pay your electricity bill? What amount of your income is what goes to electricity? And that's where Barbara got the statistic that 70% of their income would go into power, paying for electricity, just lighting up their homes and cooking. That's an absurd amount. I'm sure we all agree. If every person paid 70% of their income to light up their house, then we would have not much left, which is unfortunately the dilemma that the households in Kibera are dealing with. The second panelist is Samuel Olteita, who is in the room, and I'll invite to the front. He wrote an article that is very important after we went to Olkaria yesterday. His article is on sustainable energy and livelihoods, the policy compliance in the Olkaria geothermal project. So he outlined that, yes, this project is a multi-billion-dollar project, and it's what lights up the country. We all rely on this system. However, those people there first, those animals there first. Were they handled the correct way? Were they allowed to retain their rights, and were they not stripped of their dignity? And he will speak more on this. The last panelist on this is David Maina Jugi, who's also in a room, and I'd like to invite to the front. David Maina has an article on apologies, David. Your article was on energy choices for households in rural and urban Kenya, and I'd like to invite you to the front. His article actually guided the conversation yesterday without us realizing. And lastly, I'll invite Leo Kemboi, who will be joining us virtually. And he talks about the extra costs that are in electricity in Kenya. So with that, I'd like to open up the panel. I hope you all settled in, the online panelists. Is the virtual panelist set up? Leo and Pasi?
I'm here. I think Leo is.
Leo, can we hear a sound of assent?
Yes, yes. I'm here.
Great.
I'm here.
I would love to see you as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but can we see you? Can you turn on your camera if it's not on?
Oh, yeah. I think it's on now.
Great, perfect. Okay, welcome. Thank you to all the panelists. So these four panelists have one thing in common. They looked at the common mwananchi, the person who occupies the grassroots level when it comes to the energy system, not the corporations, not the financiers, not the government, the people in the energy system. So just some housekeeping rules. When I'm moderating, I consider myself a benevolent dictator to keep time. So I'll give you a very limited amount of time to speak. And also, I'd like to invite the online attendees to utilize the Q&A function instead of the chat function. If you have questions, that way they'll be easily seen, and we can go through this at the amount of time. So we have 20 minutes for the first panel, and again, benevolent dictator, I will be militant about this. Okay, first things first, Pasi. In just a few words, can you tell us the importance of going to the grassroots level when it comes to energy issues and getting their voices into the system and into the conversation? Why is that so important to you?
Thank you, Iman, for that question. It's very important to go to the grassroots people, because a lot of the time they're the ones who are don't have access to modern forms of energy that also tend to be very clean, reliable, and cheaper, as some research would prove. They're also the most affected by the issues pertaining to energy poverty. If I think about rural marginalized areas and even informal settlements, we see a lot of the people really striving and struggling to meet and provide for their daily need. And while exacerbated by the needs of energy, which should be a right like any other basic commodity or service, it's very crippling for me. And so because of that, a lot of the people who are still below the poverty line, those who are still living under the dollar, those who are marginalized, those who do not have voice to come to the boardrooms or to the policy tables to be able to say, this is our struggle, this is our need, this is how you can solve it, they're missing. And policy more often, especially when it comes to clean cooking, and David will speak more to this, tends to limit that. We see a little bit of progress, but in sub-Saharan Africa, just to give you a whole picture, there's still a lot of work to be done, both in enabling access to modern forms of electricity and power, but also access to modern cooking. That bridge needs to be gapped, especially for those people who are missing on the table.
Thank you for that, Pasi. And can you tell us what they said? What did they say was the issue? What were the challenges that they've been facing? In 3-4, just very quickly, just shoot them.
Okay, great. And I'll speak specifically to the engagement that the SID team and Heinrich Böll team had in Kibera back in 2019, if that's okay. I think there were 3 things that they highlighted. One was access to clean energy. It was very visible when we walked around, we did a tour, we saw the kind of energy forms that they were using, from charcoal, some were using firewood, some had different types of stoves. It was also very alarming to see that some people are actually using waste to be able to prepare their meals. Now, that is a little bit dehumanizing. So access to some of those clean forms of cooking and of energy were really, really lacking. The other thing was affordable alternatives. So they are very heavily connected to electricity, but it still remains quite expensive for them. Even though majority of the houses were connected, there is a fee that is paid at a weekly rate, but they still said it would be nice to have more affordable alternatives, both for cooking, for lighting, and for their energy needs. The other thing was awareness. They really wanted to be part of understanding what are the energy issues, what are the struggles, what are people saying out there, what solutions are there for us, but they're really lacking. Their voice is not there. And a lot of the things that we were hearing from the residents of Kibera was, we have members of parliament who can represent us in these spaces, but when they go there, they don't think about us first. They think about their own personal needs. So how can we trust the leaders who should be our representatives in that place? So we could see also the need to engage, the need to be involved. They really loved that we thought about them and went to Kibera to have an energy futures forum with them. But they were really concerned that our leaders, who should be the ones advocating for us in those high spaces, we cannot trust them, mainly because they don't carry our issues, especially energy issues, when they go to parliament or when they speak in those boardrooms and tables where they're not allowed to be because, they're from the informal settlements. So those are just some of the key issues for now.
Thank you so much for breaking it down so easily for us in a very digestible manner. So what we've picked out is that there's a need and there's a want, but there's a missing link between the realities and the needs of the community. Thank you for that, Pasi. I'm sure we'll come back around to you. If there's any questions from the room, from the panel, please put them in the chat, put up your hand. Feel free to let me know and I'll direct you to Pasi. While we wait for the questions, I think I'll introduce the next panelist immediately to my left. We have Samuel Olteita, who wrote a very interesting article on the livelihoods of the people in the sustainable energy power plants. So like the geothermal power plants. And yours is the most, I think, recent, because yesterday, those who are joining us online, yesterday we took a trip to Olkaria power plant and we had a conversation with the Kenyan officials, and they walked us through how they dealt with the community, how they dealt with the animals, and how they tried to mitigate all the negative impact that the plant would have had on their livelihoods. Now to ask Samuel, as a person from this community and as a person who is very familiar with these issues, Were the answers satisfactory to you? And from your experience, what is the reality?
As I pick on that, I don't know if the tech guy, because of time, there is a very simple flow chart I did. That's a picture. There is a flow chart that will give me to take only 2 to 3 minutes because of time. Sure. Because I may delve into much if I go as per the article that I did.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Saved it as ERG presentation.
In the interest of time, maybe you can, like Pasi led the conversation, maybe you can also talk about the main challenges that these communities face when it comes to their homes being compulsorily acquired for sustainable energy power plants.
Okay, thank you. I think as he puts up so that I can wrap up, because if I get that opportunity and that thing is up, I may not even need to go back to anything else. You would notice that it's a good idea to pursue clean energy. And there is a question that was put up, and it's in the thank you very much. Now, when you check at this diagram, I have put a very interesting title. I've said past as prologue. Past as prologue was used in a Shakespearean book called Tempest, where 2 actors thought that the crimes they did previously would justify the crimes they do again. And the decisions they made earlier would justify the decisions they make again. Now, I immediately define what a system, an energy system is. It is the appliances, processes, and practices of resource exploitation. So even if you are saying we are exploiting clean energy, it's not only interacting with the environment, it is also interacting with the economic and social livelihood of the people. So in Olkaria, where we were yesterday, there was a clear issue on the lack of consultation with the local communities. And the policies provided by the European Investment Bank, which is the main investor, clearly gives guidelines on how to engage with the local communities and the indigenous community. Secondly, threats from the implementing parties. The parties that were implementing, not the financiers, could threaten the local communities. So there are threats that if you don't accept to be relocated, then there are going to be repercussions. Number 3, there was delayed conflict resolution. The conflict resolution that the European Investment Bank was brought quite late when the conflict had already happened. And it was some sort of trying to, try to bring these parties together after the conflict. So there was no initial idea that there would be conflict. Lastly, the poor economic recovery plan, the land they were resettled. The World Bank had actually looked at the baseline report on how the land they were evacuated to was, if it's productive as the land they were in, and it was not. So the next arrow you see is on Lake Turkana, because I've also touched Lake Turkana. And the case is in court, and the case has been decided on. And the Commission of Lands and the government has been given 1 year, or else the titles will be nullified. Why? The titles were irregularly acquired. So when you regularly acquire a title, it is cancelled. If you don't put it in the right way, it is nullified. So this whole project of Lake Turkana is already in court and having a problem. Now, to give an international outlook so that we don't look local, this is happening in Norway. The Supreme Court made a decision the other day that the Sami reindeer herders who are nomadic all the way in Norway were forced to be, not to be nomadic because there are wind farms that had to be established. The court found the new land system, land management system that they were being forced into as not a model that can work for the nomads. And so it gave them time to either compensate or it would also be nullified. So what then does the future hold? Because these are the actors. You can see now that the court has become a very active actor. Clean energy is clean, but are we heading to a space where we will have protracted court battles that will lead into a nullification of every clean energy project because of simple things like in the Olkaria project? That is exactly what the article says.
Thank you very much, Samuel. I feel we've all understood that the end does not justify the means, and consultation is non-negotiable when it comes to even the cleanest forms of energy. It does not matter. There's a community there and you have to take care of them. Like I said with Pasi's presentation, if you have any questions for Samuel, leave them in the comments. Make sure I know that you have a hand up and I'll make sure your questions get to him. The third person on the panel is joining us virtually. We have Leo Kemboi. Leo is one of the authors of the articles in the report, and his article is "What is behind the price that Kenyan consumers pay for electricity?" I feel we all agree as Kenyans that our energy bill is absurd, especially for a country that has such a clean energy system. We should not be paying that much for energy. Now, the problem is most people cannot decipher what the energy bill looks like. You just go to the bottom where the number is and you say, too much, and you pay because the figures and the acronyms don't make sense to the common layman. Now, Leo, thank you for joining us. I have a huge challenge for you. In a few sentences, can you walk us through what is in our energy bill as a common wananchi? What should we look out for and what do those figures mean?
Yes, thank you so much. The electricity bill has some specific components, and first, that's what we call the fuel costs. So, and these are costs used in the generation process, especially for the thermal energy. Then there's the non-fuel costs, and then inflation adjustment. Of course, there is the foreign exchange part for the project, that for the costs that we incurred in forex. So sometimes the contracts are in USD or the pounds. Then there is what we call the security support facility. Then there is the WORMA levy, the Water Resource Management Authority. They also have another levy. Additionally, there's another. Then there are taxes on top of it. There is the VAT and other additional taxes, and then other additional levies. So you'll find that what changes is the base. So it's like a statistical model, and so that if the fuel energy costs changes, the other costs also change and the price increases. In the study, try to just explain what those costs are, but ideally it ties back to how the Kenya's energy was procured, and this is basically that it's one contract. Like the security support facility ties back to what the previous presenter was speaking about, the Electricana wind power project. So that project has a very specific security support facility that is calculated as part of the bill and charged to the consumers. So it's a variety of things, and that's why the way you see the energy costs the way they are. Some of it, like for example, one of the things that was profound was that even with the inflation adjustment, if you look at the inflation adjustment that is being used is not the Kenyan. It's not the Kenyan inflation, but partly euro and also partly the US inflation. Some people explain this by saying that those costs are incurred in the dollar and in euros and in pounds. So preferably you need to adjust inflation based on that. But still it doesn't make sense. Most of those costs doesn't make sense because it's made things difficult the way it is, even for the Kenya Power and Lighting Company as just as a monopoly, we're not being able to stay afloat financially because those are sunk costs. It's very difficult to recover. You don't know what you're paying exactly for. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Leo, for outlining for us these costs. Before you leave, just one follow-up question. You said majority of these complex systems are reliant on all of these variety of issues and are very easily altered. What cushions do you think should be in place to make sure the cost of electricity is stable and to prevent the ups and downs that we see? Just a few lines. I'm sure it's a complex thing to explain in just a few lines.
Yeah, at the top of my mind is competition. There's no meaningful competition in terms when energy is being procured either from thermal or how those companies are able to get those. So that inflation in that procurement fraud that happens is extended back all the way to the consumer, because at the end of the day, there is no free lunch. Somebody has to pay for something. So that is one of the things that I think. Secondly, the price control should be removed. Third, regulatory agencies like Urma, who are paid, who already receive funds from the exchequer through the national budget, should not charge for additional costs. So those fees, because at the end of the day, it has turned electricity into a revenue generation exercise for regulatory agencies, which should not be the case.
All right, thank you very much.
So those are some of the things. Thank you so much.
Yeah, those are some great points, and I'm sure Kenyans have had these conversations in their households. The last person, but not least, panelist that I'd like to invite, the one on the farthest, David Maina Njugi. He has an article on energy choices for households in rural and urban Kenya. So the conversation that we had yesterday was actually guided by your article, yes, on that access is not enough. Having a telephone pole or a telephone line pass in front of your house is not enough. That does not mean you have access to energy. And your article walks us through the reasons why access may not be accessed through proximity. Can you, in just a few lines, explain why you hold that stance and why the article insists that not all access is equal?
Thank you for that question. As mentioned, I'm David. And in this article, we looked at the issue of access. And one of the things that make it difficult for people to access electricity, one, connection charges are high. So the costs of these connections are actually high and, prohibitive. Sometimes Kenya Power will even require you to buy a transformer because maybe you're just outside the boundary for connection. So that is something that needs to be addressed. Of course, there are areas that the grid has not reached, and that makes it difficult for people to access energy. Off-grid solutions have been proposed, some have been done. They are also equally expensive. So you may actually have, electricity in your house, connected to your house, but you're not using it because you're being charged 70 shillings a unit, which is way above the means of most of these households. You may have connection, but according to a study carried out by the World Bank, 50% of households connected to the grid experience at least 3 outages, a week. So meaning that you actually don't have access, because you cannot plan, you cannot use what you do not have. So there are various aspects of availability, affordability that goes into this that makes it, impossible for people to have, equal access of electricity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're all in agreement. Affordability and reliability are very important aspects of energy access. And lastly, if you could walk us through maintenance of this energy. If the telephone pole is connected, more often than not, it has to be maintained throughout the years, and that training is what is important. Do you have any suggestions or any recommendations to bridge the gap between the technical expertise and the need for it?
Some of the reasons why the outages occur, the 3 per week outages occur is because the infrastructure maintenance is an issue. It was quite a task for Kenya Power to actually roll out with the support of the Rural Electrification Authority. And because of that, it's a burden for them to actually maintain these lines. And also, I think to some extent also there are quality issues in terms of the installations. So there's need to maintain these lines to make sure or to enable access. And one of the ways that this can be done is by training technicians, even at local level, empowering them and engaging them so that once a line goes down for whatever reason, a tree has fallen, then there's someone who can easily be contracted to from the area, not maybe it doesn't have to be mobilized from Nairobi or from the nearest urban center to go access. So those are capacity gaps, and these also applies for the off-grid or the mini grids, because again, some of the times they are undersized, meaning that there are capacity issues. You plug in one extra electrical equipment and the system shuts down. So there's need to continually upgrade the system as consumers or households continue using these or increase the usage, because we want to promote productive use of energy, because that is what will help these households to even pay for that electricity. So there are those capacity gaps that needs to be addressed to make sure that maintenance and upgrading of these systems happen on a regular basis.
Thank you very much, David, for that clarification. So to the audience in the room and those online, I have satisfied my curiosity by asking my questions. If you have any questions for the panel, Leo, Pasi, Samuel, and David, just put up your hand both virtually and physically, and keep the comments to a minimum and go maybe directly to the question, and I'll make sure that your questions are answered. Yes.
Yeah, so maybe my question is to Samuel. I know you had mentioned the role that the court system plays to providing that recourse to those communities. I was just wondering, is there any other avenue other than, you had mentioned protected court cases, which it takes a long time for the litigants to get that justice. Is there any other avenues that you would, maybe you would recommend? The local communities have their own social structures, indigenous communities, local communities. Could those be avenues that they could explore other than that formal court system advocate of the High Court? So I just wanted to hear your reflections on that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll collect all the questions first and then direct them to the relevant panelists. While we wait for the hands to go up, an additional question to Jabri's question, maybe you could also explain the effectiveness and the efficacy of these other systems of recourse. Any other person with a question? The virtual audience, Pasi, maybe you can let us know if anyone in the audience has a hand up.
Yes, we have Odongo Kevin, who has his hand up. So maybe he can be allowed to speak and ask his question. Odongo, can you hear us? Are you able to ask your question?
Maybe the tech team can allow him to unmute. Can you hear us? You've been allowed to unmute. Just go ahead and unmute and start speaking. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I think we can hear you.
Yeah, the question
You're a bit muffled. If maybe you can come closer to your speaker.
Okay, hope you can hear me now. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you speak now?
Yeah, the question that I asked today, I put it into the Q&A.
No, it's still a bit muffled, Kevin. Unfortunately, we can barely hear you.
Okay, then let me take to the...
Yeah, just maybe you can type it in the Q&A while we take the other questions.
Okay, thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
Iman, we do have another question from Ayo.
Ayo, go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly. Go ahead and ask your question. You've muted yourself.
Oh.
The challenges of technology. Yes, you're okay now. You can speak.
Right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So I need to, first of all, appreciate this concept and the project. And I think it's going to serve as a model that can be copied by other African nations, sincerely. But there's something I really want to really comment on, because there's an established distrust between the people and the government, and government's continual effort, in increasing the poverty level of the citizens, and that has actually made it unbearable for citizens to even trust the system, even if the cost of electricity is considered cheap. Most citizens will not be able still to afford, because of the poverty level of the citizens. And as a matter of fact, assessing one of the major problems in the electricity sector is that most people use the electricity without payments, and everyone wants to circumvent the process to be able to use energy without paying. Not because they don't want to pay, but because some of them believe that there's a way the government should be able to provide these things for them, so that they can access it at a cheaper rate. So therefore, and I think in order to make the sector more viable or probably accessible, so at least we can enjoy, because energy drives most of the sectors that we can talk about. And I think we need to also work on building trust between government and the people, so that the process also will be trusted, because without that, there's going to be
I agree very much. Thank you, Ayo. And I'd like to direct you to Pastor's article. I feel you'll find it very useful. She touches on the very issues that you bring up, the distrust between the people and the government, and the reasons for that, and what makes people not trust in the promises made by the government, even if the promises seem to solve all the energy issues. So please make sure you get your hands on Pasi's article, because it will really resonate with you. Any other hands up, Pasi?
None other one, but we do have questions typed in the chat box. Shall I bring to us one or two? Just one. So Odongo, who wasn't able to speak previously, he said, I am so glad to be part of the conversation. My question is, which mechanisms has been put into place to reach the informal settlement community? We all know they are the major contributors to unclean mode of energy. especially the use of fossil fuels is still the way of life, especially the use of kerosene in those informal settlements. So this is a question that Odongo has asked.
Thank you. One more question in the room. I see a hand up.
Thank you. My question is a little, I don't know to whom to direct it to, but whoever.
It's okay, I'll figure it out for you. Just shoot your question.
So we have agreed that energy is critical to human and social development, but not all energy is good, because partly the reason as to why we are where we are is because of the energy choices we have made in the past. Now, when we are talking or when we are thinking about the energy for the people or in the people's lives, do we feel like sometimes the people have the choice whether to have energy, whether clean or dirty, or not have it at all? And is this something that they have in their minds when they are looking for energy, to have a choice of saying, I want the clean energy, regardless of the costs?
Thank you for your question. If there's no other questions, I'll start the session of the Q&A by inviting the panelists to answer the relevant questions to them. So the most recent question asked by Martin here in the room is directed to David on whether or not the households really have a real choice when it comes to what forms of energy they consume. David?
The answer is yes and no, because sometimes these solutions are not available, unfortunately, especially when you, actually even for electricity as well as for clean cooking. So sometimes they are forced to only use what is available, and what is readily available is a firewood which they can easily collect, or the charcoal that they can either make for themselves or buy nearby. So we need to make these solutions accessible to these communities. Secondly, there's a lack of awareness, especially on the clean cooking technologies. There's a lack of awareness. Majority of those who are still using biomass to cook are not aware of even the improved solutions available. Sometimes because of availability, sometimes just because no one has told them. So there's need to have a communication mechanism that reaches everybody. We also need to be aware of the behavior and cultural issues around, for example, the cooking. And I know there's a behavior change strategy and campaign that is that we are, when you say we, the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya, as well as the Ministry of Energy is working on, that is going to look at what are the barriers, the cultural barriers to adoption, and try and address them. So, and one of the questions that was asked, maybe I could just comment. Low-cost solutions, affordability is a key issue, especially in informal settlements, and PEGO models have been seen to be quite useful in terms of solving that as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. Now, a question that was directed to Sami. What are there any other forms of recourse for those wronged, and how effective are they?
Thank you very much. I think I'd put it this way. Court processes, you can term them as painful because of the length of time they take. The Lake Turkana wind power case was filed in 2014. It was finally determined in 2021. And it reached to a point where the judges had to recuse themselves because of the pressure they were getting, that they were being forced that you have to determine this case along these lines. So the concern now on the alternative dispute resolutions, like you are saying, besides the court systems, the problem is when it comes to conflict resolution based on mediation and negotiation, it's normally based on, it's based on your, agreement to be part of the mediation process or to agree to negotiate, compared to a court system where a determination can be made even in your absence. So these mechanisms are not functioning at times because the powerful stakeholders like the government and the implementing institutions on the ground are not agreeing to come to the table and are not agreeing to come to the common ground. So that is normally the challenge. As I finish on what she asked about the effectiveness, I gave an example of the one in Kengen area. The European Investment Bank noticed that there was an issue, there was a conflict. So it brought in a conflict mechanism. But by the time the conflict mechanism comes in, and there is already bad blood between the parties, and the neutrality of the government in this case will not be there. So the government and Kengen were probably put up together and thought these are the people who are coming to fight us. So I think my idea would be, could we think about having a guideline on having conflict resolution for clean energy implementation between the implementer and the local communities? There are handbooks all over produced by civil society and organizations so that it can guide, because at times you cannot, the activities that happen in society go beyond to the regulations that exist.
Thank you very much, Samuel. And thank you to all the panelists. I think these were great conversations and they have synthesized the conversation in such a simple way that I think majority of people can follow. Please make sure you trace down those documents, read them. If you have any other questions, please write them in the chat. I will make sure they get to the relevant parties and you can leave your email so that they can respond to you at a later date. With that, I'd like to suggest we take a quick break. If you're in the room, please grab a cup of tea. If you're at home, step away from your PC, take a quick breath, and then we can meet back here in a few minutes. Maybe Barbara can give us direction on how fast we can come back.
15 minutes, 10 minutes.
10 minutes break. Like I said, benevolent dictator, I should find you back at your desks in 10 minutes.
Where we decide to go. Monongeletten, Tewaten, Nasima God Idioten, Onina Wanika, Mon Pulimwa Mutanenoten, Ukunaben, Bebena Waten, Dutunyimba Mulematen, Ebukimba Maboden, Elena Boy, Mona Wabongo G-Town. Amunja mit inyandolo, weapon ba meseten, mona menwe kata midongoten, bukato be no waten. Now mende kata wiaten, na sivinje na imente no vola ruku, unyolangoye. Il bosambo bwe pombo wana dalowina. Il kine walote kinde kimila boku mama. Polingwa mama na mwana mutakota te. Butuna mo imamele na kubundao. Mobotia zami sisae mwana ndefololo nyuso sala ponangao mamilina bungang mamilina bungang makianale ina masuma pona bobe na dalowina nde ntosenga tomalia mama mawas na wesa no moyo bala ye wila so bana upa oh my makianade in bosambo boni sisi ana Halloween pinyolo mande angona mulatoi nsenga malia mukanda wo bakaka balimba na tena subu nimele soman matila kuna dibe munyenge Neni jarabide kelela hodonna neni furunyonde kelela hodonna ay bangi bolodane kana ay bangi bolodane gizella ay bangi bolodane kunna ay bangi bolodane nyala ne dosu kolobe dimina kune dumbe jaradife ne dumbe nganu fe ne dumbe jarabife ne dumbe nganu
Nantenkweta shiketo ja shikomo penduka ye Hakweto chirongo hoshiwa ye Ntodi machike nandoto ikova fisbei Hayeswa komunda kokuvare Munda mwimu nokuvare novusteine
Hule wapi mu lili wake as far as the eye can see Rike kile rina mile Mono mule fatile Barui le balimi Mono monamibia
Ankwari shime yuko ure Ke umbola meme wange mkwepe Nande uje ko wamboko kuleto yashike ko vusteine Hakweto shilongo shiwa Utalo miti na vanu Utalo vanu no miti Hakweto na shikova wa
Chokai, yakai, kakwanu mono go monate fela uchakai uyakai chakwano mono go monate fela ayo mwana yeah 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 meshiwa meshiwa kalagare meshiwa meshiwa mami kese meshiwa meshiwa kalagare meshiwa meshiwa mami kese. There's a land of wide open spaces, so many, many, many faces. There's a land of wide open spaces, so many beautiful faces. Namibia, ona warona.
Kakubare, bakwato shirongo woshiwa, muno fandu peke peke, ovampo no maherero, nkwesa, yeah, no wakapirivi no fandu peke peke.
Takwano bakayechu, lefatilena. The land of wide open spaces, they say, where your soul can rest, where you can be at home. Mono Namibia.
Oshilongo shilipo katike dese de limbali, Namibia no Kalahari. Ipuko mo ilinoko, no miti di modile di modi kupi. Oshilongwa kwetu shiwa
Ushakai, uyakai, takwano, mono homonati fela. Ushakai, uyakai, takwano, mono homonati fela. Ayo mama, ari yeah 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 yeah. Meshiwa, meshiwa. Kalahare meshiwa meshiwa mami kese meshiwa meshiwa
So maybe, I don't know, Halima, just confirm you're able to turn on your video. I see Halima and Jesse. Do they have, are they able to turn on their videos? Sometimes they're not. Yeah, can you hear us, Halima? I see you've unmuted. Just to confirm, Jesse, can you hear us? Halima, can you hear us?
I personally can hear you.
Okay, good. Are you able to turn on your camera?
Let me try.
Okay. And then we can have those two. Just Jesse and Halima only on the projector. That would be good. And then maybe Pasi. Halima, I don't know if you're able to hear us. Pasi, if you're still with us, could you check with Halima if she can? Because I see she's yes, I very, very faintly. I just heard you, Halima. Are you able to go close to your microphone? Or if you have earphones, you can put them on. Because I can hear you very faintly.
Is that better?
Yes, good, yes, yeah. Are you able to turn on your video? Just kind request to...
I can't turn on my video. It's telling me that the host has stopped it.
No, okay, yeah, we see your video now.
Okay.
Cool. Good. So we'll start. So, hi everyone. Habari zenu. Shikamo.
Marhaba.
So we'll keep it, as I said, as my catchphrase now, short and sweet. I'll just go through Halima first. We unpack her article. Then we go to you, Modoni. We talk about the finance side of it. And then straight we go to Jesse, talking about the tech part of it. And then at the end, we'll just field one question from physical, one question from virtual. And then, yeah, that will close the session. This panel is actually very interesting. It covers law, it covers finance, it covers tech. And maybe at the end, no, I hope Halima, FDB Fox, Jesse, maybe you can co-author one that covers tech, law, finance. You really close that loop. And then just from previous sessions, something that we have to be really careful is what are we calling electricity? What are we calling energy? Because energy is the umbrella term, but there's also electricity. So when you hear people are using biomass, charcoal, that is not electricity, but it falls under the phrase of energy. So I just wanted to reflect on that. Yeah, so maybe you can start with Halima, and I can introduce you, Halima. And if I miss anything out, please feel free to add those titles. So Halima Hussein is an energy and environmental law practitioner, but she also heads up the Uhai Initiative. And her chapter is chapter 8 of the compendium, and it's unpacking Kenya's Energy Act, the 2019 one, the newest version of our Energy Act, with all the addendums, with all the new provisions. So Halima, I'm just going to, 30 seconds, I'm going to give my reflections and kind of my prompts to you, but please feel free to talk about anything you want to talk about in your article. Don't feel you're constrained to my questions. So kind of my first prompt is, how can we ensure, because you outlined this very ambitious legal framework, right? And Kenya is infamously known, very progressive in the legal structures. The legal frameworks, policy frameworks, our regulations are top-notch. But when we go to the crux of the matter, the operationalization, effectuation by the institutions that are mandated, how can we kind of hold those institutions to account? Is it perhaps the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal? Is it EPT? And then another thing you said in your article, which was very all-encompassing, was the capital costs are prohibitive to enter this sector. So, and you said KenGen is our majority generator, KPLC, our majority distributor. And you said the capital costs are prohibitive, and they're capturing that market in a very aggressive way. So I just wanted, if you could maybe expound, do you think, in your opinion, it would be more effective if we had maybe more generators, more distributors? What do you think? And maybe in the mini grids integration. And then the last thing I just want to reflect on is the last part of your article, the conflict of law you mentioned, where Halima, we're getting a request here. If you can tilt down your laptop so we can see your full face. Perfect, yes. So yeah, and the last thing, just to reiterate my last prompt, the last part of your article, the conflict of law you had mentioned, where the Energy Act, it almost goes against international decisions, like just the SDG 7, the COP26 cover decision about phasing down coal, because it does provide provisions on downstreaming coal, which is fair enough, but our public resources are being used to scope coal and all that. Is that the best use of our public monies? And then but also mentions that this production of energy via coal should comply with environmental, social considerations. But in my opinion, I think that's a contradiction. Coal can never comply with any environmental considerations. And then, yeah, those are my initial kind of prompts to just generate the dialogue. But as I said, just feel free to talk about anything in your article. Thanks, and over to you now, Halima. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jabri, for that introduction. I'll just jump right into your question. I believe the first question was about the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal, the former Energy. So this is a quasi-judicial body that would ordinarily question under the former Energy Act. So now under the new Energy Act, it has a very expanded mandate because it can not only hear and determine questions regarding the Energy Act, but any other written laws. I remember there was a previous speaker who talked about disputes, how would disputes be determined, and that fact, any other written laws really expands that scope. However, in terms of implementation, has anyone brought a matter besides matters, disputes, resident in the Energy Act? We'd have to hear, we'd have to mitigate this to understand the framework, the scope of the tribunal. I'm thinking about the tribunal, and I think it is, I've used a very ambitious tone when talking about the Energy Act, because I do believe that there's a lot more that this act has provided. So even picking up from the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal, it has really expanded the scope of reliefs that the tribunal can provide members of the public coming before it. So you can have injunctions, which ordinarily we get from the courts, the High Court. We'd have injunctions, we'd have penalties, we'd have damages, specific performance, even the power to review its own judgments and orders. So I think the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal, in terms of dispute resolution, has a very expanded scope. However, we can only judge it based on the matters that have come before it, in terms of litigating new matters, litigating matters concerning energy, but not resident under the Energy Act. So it's upon us to test this tribunal. I believe the second question was on capital intensive, the capital prohibitive nature of energy projects in Kenya. Yes, it is true, and I talk about it in the article. The capital costs are very prohibitive. So it's upon the government to give a conducive structure to attract investors and to enable the ordinary mwananchi participate in our, energy framework. So for instance, just to take us back to the Act and the institutions that it provides and the structures that it puts in place, the Renewable Energy feed-in tariff system has been talked about in this Act. It cements the 2008 feed-in tariff policy, and the purpose of this was to encourage generation from renewables, but not just renewables, to encourage localized distribution networks. So when you have more localized distribution networks, you reduce overloading the national transmission networks, you reduce system losses, you end up reducing the costs and that we pay in terms of our tariffs. So that, in my opinion, in terms of the capital prohibitive nature of energy projects, it really helps a lot. Another thing that the Act does provide is the renewable energy resources inventory and resource map. And this is really good because ideally under the old Act, as an investor, you are required to provide feasibility studies in support of your projects. So the fact that the Act mandates the Cabinet Secretary, to carry out a survey on the whole country regarding resources, renewable energy resources available to investors, this will be critical because that map will then pinpoint the areas in which now investors can come in to exploit our renewable resources. Another thing I talked about in the article regarding this prohibitive nature, capital prohibitive nature of the Act, capital prohibitive nature and how it concerns it is on the negative side with regards to land. The Act hasn't really talked about land and how we deal with land issues. And, this is very concerning, in light of the decisions that are coming out of our courts now. So even the Turkana Wind Power project that was decided recently, having such a very capital intensive project go through, having to then go back to investors who, came in to invest on the, condition that land would be set aside, they would pay for that land. Then having these communities come in to agitate, and the government not, being at the forefront of deciding of providing a really good framework of compensating, a really good framework of how they acquired this land. It's concerning, and the Act doesn't talk about that. So in terms of reforms, and hopefully we'll have this in a few years, one of the things they need to talk about is the land issue, because it's very capital prohibitive to invest in energy projects, and there's no way you can attract the right investors when you have such issues that then impact the entire project that haven't been dealt with effectively by the Act. I think there was the third, if I recall, the third question. Oh, yes.
Conflict of law, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so the conflict, and I do talk about this conflict as well in the Act. So the Act talks about, renewable energy resources. The state will have vested rights in renewable energy resources. The counties will have the opportunity to, have county energy plans implementing renewable energy resources, have electricity and gas reticulation, regulate biomass. So you're talking about renewable energy resources, the map, the inventory and resource map that I talked about earlier, feed-in tariff system, net metering to allow people to, put up solar projects and then, sell their excess power to the grid and make money. So we talk a lot about renewable energy resources, but we also talk about petroleum, downstream petroleum and coal in this Act. And it's a conflict. I understand the emotional justification that is provided by African countries with regard to, encouraging coal and petroleum extraction and, getting the revenues that we do need to develop. However, we are also the ones most highly impacted by climate change. Africans are the most impacted. So it's an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense that you'd have all these resources. And in Kenya, we really have no excuse. We have a lot of geothermal potential. Our wind runs at 0.5 capacity factor. Our geothermal runs at 0.8 capacity factor, which, it backs the intermittent trends of renewable energy. So we really don't have an excuse. And that is one conflict that arises in the Act. And hopefully, again, reforms need to consider that and allow us to move on, develop sustainably, whilst also, taking care of our needs, our economic needs.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Halima, for your reflections. We are going to come back to you, hopefully at the end. If you could just write down your questions, we could ask the three panelists. I really liked your reflections on the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal. They have now they can issue out injunction-specific performance. They have that legal force, which grants respect and can grant litigants, the recourse and the access to justice. The scope has been widened. We also have the renewable energy feed-in tariffs, which reduces the stress. It feels like there is no con to the feed-in tariffs because it reduces stress on generation distribution. And then also the mapping, which can allow private sector to crowd in the energy sector, because right now we can't, monopolies in the energy sector, it doesn't allow for innovation, the price to go down. So that's some of the challenges we are facing. Just to quickly move on to our other panelists, Mudhoni Nduhyu from the AFDB, who is a climate finance and NDC implementation specialist. She wrote chapter 16 of the compendium, The Financing Green Electric Generation in Kenya. So my reflections from that, and as I said, you can just speak about anything you think is most pertinent, But just to generate the dialogue, I was thinking about how energy generation globally is on mitigation, lowering the emissions. But I often feel like in Africa, and especially in Kenya, you can talk about the resilience that the energy sector can bring. For example, cooling, so heat stress, and can offer in areas that are subject to heat stress, access to renewable energy can offer cooling for houses, cold chain for vaccines, etc. So there's that resilience dimension in the resilience/adaptation dimension to the energy sector that I feel is a bit underserved. And then also, you mentioned two things before I pass to you. So if you could elaborate more, because I'm not an expert on this, on some of the financial mechanisms you have talked about, the partial risk guarantees, the political risk insurance. Why are those services by FDB and World Bank, why are they important, and why important for African countries? And then also you said energy investment should not stop at just lighting, but should go to productive use, to targeted productive use. And then I said two things, but I also one last thing I want to point out is, how does AFDB monitor the plumbing, of finance from AFDB to the last person? How does AFDB have accountability, transparency mechanisms to monitor that plumbing of finance, like the pipes? Are you able to see where the money flows? That would be interesting. And then, as I said, to our virtual and physical audience, please write down your questions. We're going to go at the last part of the session. We're going to ask 3 questions. Thanks, and over to you, Muthoni.
Okay, thank you very much. Slight correction, I co-authored this piece as well with my colleague, Olufunso Shomorin, who is here today, and he's a regional lead for East Africa on climate change and green growth issues. So for the first question, at the bank, for all our investments, the first screen for climate change and green growth components. And what we try to do, in as much as there's, it's a mitigation project, like green or clean electricity, in as much as it's a mitigation project, we find ways in which to incorporate adaptation interventions as well. So if it's solar production, then how can we use this to feed into agriculture in terms of solar powered irrigation? How can we use this for maybe drying and value addition as well? So we do try to always mix the two. When it's adaptation, can we put in mitigation incentives as well? If it's mitigation, can we put adaptation action as well to that? To the second question on the role of the different instruments that the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank put in. So for financing renewable energy projects and electricity as well, it's been mentioned by several speakers before, it's an extremely expensive affair. And for governments, they have competing development interests. And just recently, because of the COVID-19 effects, there's been an economic crisis, and therefore they need other sources of finance besides just public funds. So then the people who have a lot of the resources is the private sector. So, and Africa is still viewed as a high risk continent to invest in. So it's important to put in incentives as well as policies that and laws which give some sort of stability and assurance to the private sector. So for Kenya specifically, the government has been mentioned, is really good at the regulations and the policy bit of it. And they put in place the Public-Private Partnership Act, which just regulates how financing and partnerships on building and operation go about, which the effect of that is it gives some sort of comfort to investors as well, because they know these are the laws and they can be enforced and they're able to get out what they're trying to achieve. So it's not just a government that drives these incentives and comfort. The role of development partners, financial institutions such as the Africa Development Bank and the World Bank come in. So what the Africa Development Bank did, for example, in the Lake Turkana wind power project, We offered a partial risk guarantee. And this was supposed to help the private sector get some form of comfort in case there was delays in construction of the transmission line between Loyangalani and Suswa. So when the private sector says that their investment will not go to waste in case of this risk happening, they are more willing to invest. For the World Bank, again, they have the political risk insurance, which just secures the investors from civil disturbance, which could damage the property, or secure the rights of ownership as well. And there's also the issue of concessional financing. As you said, it's very expensive to finance this. So development finance institutions do give financing at rates lower than commercial banks. And this could be like the AFD, the French Development Organization, the Dutch Development as well, have that. And the bank also offered concessional financing for the Menengai geothermal and Kopere solar power. And this is just to increase participation of the private sector because they now have access to more affordable facilities in that. And your third question, was that on the tracking of the financing?
Yeah, yes, on the what I call the plumbing, the piping. Yeah.
So we do have something called where we do climate finance tracking. And it's one of the requirements of multilateral development banks, where you are basically meant to kind of disclose and track the amount of financing you're apportioning to either mitigation or adaptation, and the exact activities it's going towards to, and the percentages. And for the bank, one of the things we pride ourselves in is that we were one of the, I think, the only development bank to achieve parity in terms of adaptation and mitigation financing. As at now, we now even fund more of adaptation versus mitigation because it's Africa's priority right now. And so, yes, through the climate finance tracking that's required of multilateral development banks, that's how we monitor where our financing is going. And I would ask my colleague, my co-author, Olufunso, if he has anything to add.
Yes, please go ahead, Funso.
Okay, good. Just one point. I think when you talk about the broader issues of financing renewable energy investment in Africa, the starting point is to remind ourselves that globally, the quantum of money that we need to be able to achieve this investment and achieve the energy assets that we're talking about. We're talking of a continent right now with 645 million people without access to energy. The quantum of money that we need currently exists in the global economy. We're not going to need to print more money. We're not going to need to make profit from trade before we can address those issues. We've got those billions and trillions of dollars that we need to solve the problem. The biggest challenge is distribution. And because distribution is you have money where it's most needed, unfortunately, where it's quite least available compared to where it's least needed and most available. And that is also the disparity between North and South. And now the language that we need to learn how to speak, it's more about the business language. How do you bring in the private capital that we're talking about? What kind of policy incentives do you need to put in place? But also what kind of risk sharing mechanisms? You know, a guarantee provided by a development bank provides a lot of comfort for a private investor. And the policies that you have in place have been able to help us to have now independent power producers being part of generation. So it's very important to understand that the distribution challenge is going to be our biggest headache in Africa. How do we create the business that, because this is not going to happen by grant. The second thing is we also have to interrogate why the pricing at the local level is still expensive, despite the tremendous investment that's gone into origination, despite the cost going down over time. Why do we still pay this much by the local users? I mean, I missed some part of this. I imagine that you've touched on that. So on the financing, it's not enough to look at it from the origination and the generation side, but also to look at it, is that transforming into change on the ground? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mudhoni and Funzo. I agree that the money exists, because even philanthropic money, other than the DFIs and MDBs, that is also something that is coming very strongly into this space. I know this philanthropic organization, Rockefeller, wants to sign MOUs with entire countries. So that's very interesting. On to the next one. The next last panelist for this session, who's covering the tech part of it, Jesse. I hope you can hear us, and please feel free to turn on your camera. So Jesse is a control engineer, and he just is in an electricity generation plant. So maybe if it's not sensitive information, you can let us know which generation plant. And then he covers chapter 17, the renewable energy technology for power generation in Kenya, talking about clean cooking, thermal generation, and some of the energy storage technologies for the national grid. So I'll just pass to you, Jesse, for your quick intervention before we go to the questions. Over to you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, you can hear me well, I hope.
Yes, very well.
Okay, I left that information. It is not that it is a private information, it's only that sometimes I'm all over the country. So that's why sometimes I keep it off, because now I cannot tell you I'm here, then tomorrow you hear I'm somewhere else. But currently I'm stationed at the River 2 power plant in Machakos. That's where I am. And that is where I'm currently holding as a dispatch control engineer. And the plant is used as a balancing power plant for Kenya, and we are currently dispatched to Nairobi, only Nairobi and its environs. Is there another question, or we get to the?
Yeah, no, just the other, I was mentioning some of the things you talked about in the article, the clean cooking, and you mentioned the thermal generation that Kenya does that relies on fossil fuel. You also mentioned some of the energy storage technologies for the national grid. So maybe you can feel free to expound on those, but any others that you think jump out of that article. So yeah, over to you.
Okay, it's okay. Then I can just jump into the paper now. Myself, I was working on the technologies, that is the renewable energy power generation technologies in that is for Kenya. And I was not looking at what Kenya is doing or what Kenya is planning to do. I was looking at those technologies that are being used all over the world, but currently in Kenya, we have no plans. So I first looked at what Kenya was planning to do in terms of the risk cost power development plan. Then I identified the technologies that are not, have not been captured. And those were the most of the technologies that I was looking at. So currently in Kenya, we are really doing well when it comes to renewable energy, and that is grid tied. I think my paper was more of a grid tied. I separated between the grid, the mini grids, and the off grid. So when it comes to the grid, we are doing so well. And it has been said severally that when it comes to the generation capacity on the grid, most of the time we are doing above 90%. But that is tied to availability in terms of if the winds are doing well and if the hydros have water. And I'm saying that because currently, as we speak, the hydros are not doing so that well, which means the thermal power plant are having a higher percentage in terms of generation. So if you see next month that the power cost went up, I don't be asking questions what happened. The hydros are not doing so that well in terms of the amount of water they have. So that's why the thermals are doing, they have a higher availability. So I was looking, when it comes to renewable energy, I was looking at some of the emerging technologies that can help us. We always talk of the intermittency of renewable energy, and that has always been the story. But again, do we throw off the story because of the intermittency and the nature of how they are being produced and some of the issues they have been causing on the grid? No. So my interest went into some of the energy storage emerging technologies that we can be able to maybe tap so that at least we can reduce the effects of the effects of renewable energy, intermittent renewable energy. And intermittent, I mean solar and wind, because already geothermal, we are doing well. It's a renewable energy, but it's not intermittent. And hydros, when we have enough water, we are doing well, except like now, where the amount of water is not enough. So I was looking at the emerging technologies, and some of the things I was looking at was the battery storage. And the battery storage, I was looking at lithium-ion battery storage as one of the ways we can encompass it into, so that we can reduce the intermittent nature of the solar and wind. Maybe at this point I can say one of the best things is that you had to give the finance and the legal part ahead of me, because when it comes now to some of these emerging technologies, the debate has been on the financing part of it. And again, as we look forward to solving some of the issues we have to remember at the end of the day, we are trying all of us to bring the cost down. I don't like calling it cheap because I don't believe in cheap. I like calling it affordable. We bring the cost to a level where it's affordable for us as a country in terms of consumption of this power. So at the end of the day, we have to strike a balance between adopting these technologies and at the end of the day also solving some of the issues and making sure the cost is as we want it. So lithium was one of it. And I think lithium is a matured technology. It has been used in so many countries, and we hope along the way we'll see more of it. The lithium-ion batteries being captured in Kenya along the way. The second technology I was looking at is pumped hydro storage. At that time when we were looking at, we were writing this paper, the pumped hydro storage, like calling it PHS, was not part of Kenya's idea on the table. According to the Least Cost Power Development 2017, which is the one we were working with at that time, PHS was not part of the consideration. Pumped hydro storage, we call it a water battery because it's more of a battery in a way. It behaves like a battery. And the best thing is that it can be combined with the wind and solar in such a way that we can be able to reduce the intermittent nature of wind and solar, which means that the renewable energy on itself can be able to solve its own challenges without even encompassing any other technologies. If you combine the three, solar, wind, and the pumped hydro storage in a way, and they're able to balance along the way, you are more than okay to go ahead with it. But again, looking at the least cost power development plan for Kenya 2021, I think for the first time we have captured the pumped hydro storage. So I have seen it. It has already been captured, and I know there has already been a debate. And the biggest debate for the better part of this year has been on the cost, which means, again, we are going back to the financing part of it. I think that's where the issue has been. But again, pumped hydro storage, when it comes to grid tied, is offering us something we like talking about a lot, which we say is the ancillary services. These ancillary services, we mean frequency regulation, voltage regulation, reactive power, giving us inertia on the grid. These are requirements of any grid, any power system. And initially, for those countries that they have coal, nuclear, these used to be, they are usually offered by this so well. But again, when it comes to now, like in our grid where we have a lot of solar and wind coming in, these becomes even major requirement that maybe with now not having a lot of thermal power plant on the grid, we might have a deficiency of some of these, because currently the thermal power plant in Kenya are the ones that offer some of these ancillary services. So when I see the debate about the pumped hydro storage in terms of cost, and I look at the thermal power plant, I like saying all we need to do, we need to sit down and have a sober discussion in terms of the cost benefit analysis that will be offered by PHS as compared to thermal power plants in Kenya. The next thing I was looking at was we are currently doing well in terms of geothermal in Kenya. But I was also looking at it from this point of view where we are also doing well in terms of solar in the same field where there is geothermal. So I was looking at it from this point of view that maybe along the way Kenya should maybe have a I like calling it hybridized geothermal solar, a hybrid geothermal with solar in such a way that we can be able to harness more of this. But now this one doesn't come in terms of the normal, we know photovoltaic solar, this is more of concentrated solar. And when it comes to concentrated solar power, that one now again reduces the nature of solar being intermittent, because now it becomes more like it can even work as a base load. So that is another issue, another way we can be able to solve the challenge that we have been having, combining these two. And again, this has been my thinking, but I know a country like Djibouti is already on its way of having a hybrid of a geothermal and solar. So along the way, they might be the first country in Africa to be able to do a hybrid of geothermal and solar. But again, also Kenya, we have the opportunity. As much as we say we are more than okay in terms of geothermal, this is another area where through the hybridization, we have been able, through the different modeling and simulations, we have been able to see that we can be able to get an additional amount of power being produced. Another thing I was looking at from that was now from the hybrid geothermal and solar. Now, again, I was looking at the concentrated solar power separately on its own, a technology on its own. I know it has been used in North Africa. And again, I'm looking at solar that Kenya, we have the advantage being along the equator and having our solar potential being so high. So this is another technology that you can be able to use. And again, concentrated solar power, as I'm saying, doesn't come as a intermittent the way we know of PV, the photovoltaic. It comes in as a base load because it has no intermittence. And also, we shall be combining it with another technology called the molten salt reactors, which is one of the technology that is used with the concentrated solar power. And this again is able to offer some ancillary services that are required by the grid when it's combined with the molten salt reactors. So that is when it comes to the grid. That one I was just discussing the grid. Now for the off-grid, we have the off-grid and the mini-grid. I think the best thing we can do is adopt the energy storage, the battery energy storage technologies, because at the end of the day, maybe sometimes you find the solar is there during the day, but in the evening there is no solar. So what happens during the evening? And that's when the people need light. So maybe you can combine with the battery energy storage. But again, we can find you can find like if you are able to come up with a way where we are able to combine like solar and wind in such a way that they can be able to be complementing each other, because you find like sometimes the wind are doing so well in the evening while solar is doing so well during the day. So if you now can be able to come up with a solar, wind, battery storage system combined in a way, already for a mini grid, that would be another way we can go about it. But again, it is all coming down to the same question that has always been there, the financing part of it, because again, we don't just want to set up this and we say we have it. We need to have affordable power for people to be able to utilize this power. Again, we are in a country where now for the mini grid and the off grid, they have been taken with the seriousness they deserve in such a way that the government is looking at it so well through EPRA that this is not about 50-50. They are really in it, seeing that the mini grid and off grid take off and that they are able to do it. So these are some of the technologies maybe they can use. And not just the battery alone, they can also look at the molten salt reactors to act as a battery storage. But again, I think for that, we can first leave it for the grid side, and we just concentrate when it comes to the off-grid and the mini-grid, maybe look at the battery storage because of the cost.
Jesse, I have to interrupt you now just because we're running out of time, but
I'm okay. In fact, I'm done.
You're done. Okay, good.
Yes.
Maybe just, I also liked what you mentioned about green hydrogen, which Kenya has a green hydrogen working group. And I sincerely hope you're part of that, because you clearly know you have the technical expertise. I want to pass to our physical audience first. If you have a question, you can just lift up your hand. Yeah, Edikite, over to you.
Oh, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I think I got a bit confused at part of your point, because solar is basically PV. And in your presentation, you said that solar itself being an intermittent source of renewable energy. Why do you again tell us that photovoltaic is less intermittent? And again, I wanted to know, how is having a hybrid system like hybridization help solve the energy gap? Because I understand that an hybrid system is where one complements the other. When we refer to the intermittent nature of renewables, now we make the hybrid system so that in any case there's a shortfall in the supply from the other, then one complements the other. So I wanted to know how hybridization leads to bridges the gap in the energy supply and demand.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I assume that's for Jesse. So Jesse, feel free, but also our other panelists, if you want to contribute to the answering that question, please just unmute yourself and contribute. Thanks.
Can I go ahead and answer?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, my apologies. I think you didn't get exactly what I said about. I said there is what currently we use in Kenya is the PV. But now what I was trying to capture on my paper was that also we should look for concentrated solar power, which is not kind of like the way we know the PV. That is a different technology from PV. In fact, even the whole technology is separate from PV. These are two different entities altogether. It is not the normal PV as we know it. Because for concentrated solar, we are using this solar energy. We are trying to capture as much solar energy we can get. But we use maybe like that water, that energy, solar energy, to heat something else that will go and produce, now being used to produce electricity. Kinda like when it comes to a hybrid system with geothermal, I was looking whereby maybe after geothermal has produced, after the steam from geothermal has produced electricity, most of the time it has been lowered in terms of the temperature, and that's why on the other side it has been lowered in terms of the temperature. So rather than first getting to the injection when it comes to geothermal, I hope I'm not getting technical. I don't want to get into the technical part of it. But rather than being reinjected back to the ground, we can first heat that steam using concentrated solar, and maybe use now this heated steam to take it to the next step of another turbine that generates steam. Not steam, another turbine that now generates power. Then afterward, that when we do the reinjection. So that is where the hybrid system for geothermal and solar is coming in. So I hope I've answered your question that PV and the concentrated solar power, these are two different technologies altogether, and they don't work in the same principle.
You want us to have an hybrid system where we use solar energy to heat an already steamed geothermal. Is that what we're saying? Why is the economic sense? Why should we invest this in another? The money we use to invest in solar to heat steam, which is already hot to a temperature which we can generate. Why should we again heat the heated steam?
This is the concept. This is where the concept was coming in. That after this steam from geothermal, after it has passed through the turbine, after generating electricity, it comes on the outlet side at a lower temperature. I hope you have gotten me. It comes at a lower temperature. It's not that it is cold. I don't want to use cold. That's why I'm still calling it steam, though it's not that high temperature. It's still lower temperature. So with concentrated solar power, it passes through that system of concentrated solar power in such a way that, again, the temperature that had dropped, it is a kind of, it goes high again through the after hitting through the concentrated solar. And it is now directed to another turbine along the way in the system where it is able to produce electricity. Then from there, after producing the electricity from the second turbine, that is when now we go back to the normal reinjection procedure when it comes to geothermal. But again, this is more of a question. I believe your question is more of economics. Does it, at the end of the day, add value? Or does it, at the end of the day, in terms of value for money, does it, at the end of the day, solve the question that was there? Because at the end of the day, it is not even amount of the power that will be generated, is this amount of power that has been generated, is it enough to cover for the cost of installation of this hybrid system? Which for me, I believe it's a viable option. And again, as I'm giving an example already, I've seen Djibouti is already working on the same. And maybe we expect in 2 to 3 years, they will have already set up their hybrid system.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I think it enhances, just maybe that will be our last question. The virtual audience, Pasi, I hope you can funnel them directly to Jesse after, because we're so over time. I think it makes the geothermal more efficient because it hits up the stream again. Yes, go ahead, please.
Just to an input into the discussion why we're talking about the hybrid system between solar and geothermal. At times when we talk about low heat from geothermal, maybe 150 degrees and below, then we are focusing on concentrated solar, not the PV, to heat to desirable heat for steam generation. It is hybrid when some of the fields do not generate hot enough steam, right? But now, just on the sideshow, economics apart, it is very important to note that areas where we have geothermal in Kenya, for instance, are semi-arid areas, and I know they have enough intensity for PV solar generation. Then the hybrid also would be, apart from the hybrid systems, the solar geothermal hybrid systems, then we can also look at it in terms of cutting cost on existing infrastructure, where if we have solar farms near the geothermal field, because there's enough intensity for solar, then we can capitalize on existing infrastructure, particularly on evacuation. So this will be near the grid systems. So it's also another way where he's talking of either we go directly into the hybrid systems and also think about PV solar on areas where you have intensity, which are semi-arid areas of the country. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think let's conclude the panel, unless there's a really burning question, like a quick one. Yes, go ahead, Jasper.
Very much. Just to use the other panelists,
yes.
The other two. What is your take on the perceived perception by investors on the sanctity of the PPAs? Any of the two, the lawyer and the banker.
Maybe start with Halima. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So cancellation of, if you notice, what has happened is that we've had PPAs that have not yet been implemented, PPAs that are in the pipeline of, of being drafted or being negotiated. Those are the ones that have been cancelled. Cancelling already established PPAs is very difficult because they have very clear avenues of resolving disputes. So when an investor comes in to sink in billions in a thermal, in an IPP, in a thermal plant, the only way they can do that is with the security of knowing that they would get back the investment. So it's very difficult for the government to cancel already established PPAs, already established plans with cogent PPAs with Kenya Power. It's very difficult to do that. However, this has just happened, and we are yet to see the repercussions of canceling these PPAs. whether they would pay damages, but we even have enough damages to pay someone who has sunk in and invested billions. It's very difficult to get out of that. So I'm also sitting on the sidelines, looking at it very interested, with a bit of concern. I don't know how we get out of this as a country. We can get out of ones that we have not been implemented. So PPAs coming up, but already established PPAs with thermal power plants already, running in this country. It's very difficult. Take or pay. I don't think we can run away from it.
Mudhoni, I don't know if you, or Funso, if you wanted to reflect on that.
Well, I think it's also important for everyone to understand the politics of the game. Now, if you came to an investor to give you some money, the market is PPA. Okay, that's basically the business. That's the insurance that you have that. On the other hand, the government itself will not give you PPA unless you come with a letter that you have an investor behind you. So that should be the case, that's the chicken and egg. But what happened in the past was a lot of people got PPAs and you're given a timeline to, operationalize. And then they now started going to the market to look for money, and which they couldn't find in good time. So as she said, the group of PPAs that you've not done anything operation, you've not been able to raise money for, those are the ones that have been very much canceled. The ones that are already in operation, not very much. So not so. So what we need to do differently, and I think if anybody from the government is here, is to be able to do in some other countries what they call an auction system. You come to the market, you say, I want to give up PPA for this amount of money, for this amount of energy. It could be 500 megawatts. If you know that you have what it takes to be able to implement, within 12 months, you have your resources ready and you actually do like an open bidding. And let me tell you, that's what Ethiopia did, to the point that today you're pricing PPA on solar in Ethiopia at 2.5 cents. And over here in Kenya, you're still talking about 7.5 to 10. So you have to do this open auction system where you're able to drive competition and allow that to drive the price down. I think that's the direction that we have to take. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to close this session now. Thank you for all the contributions, the questions. I want to thank Halima, I want to thank Mudhoni, Funso, I want to thank Jesse for that, the financing, the law part of it and the tech part of it. We have one more panel, and I know we went over time, but this was a very rich discussion we were having, so I apologize for going over time. I want to pass back to Iman, who is facilitating our last panel before we close. Thanks, everyone, and over to you, Iman.
Thank you all, and thank you to all the panelists and the moderator. From the claps in the room, even though we enjoyed the conversation, I feel we've learned a lot and I feel we're a bit tired. So maybe we can have a quick stretch. If everyone could stand up, and if you're at home, please have some self-regulation and stand up in your room. Yeah, just have a quick stretch, turn your head this way and that way. Yeah, you can move your legs on the spot. Your legs have probably not moved from the same position for some time now. Yeah, just maybe walk on the spot for a few seconds. And at home, I hope you're doing the same thing. It's good for your body and for your mental space to have a quick break after so much learning. Great, okay, then we can settle back down and maybe start the next panel. I hope you've had a quick breath. Okay, thank you for the previous panel. Now we'll quickly go over to the final panel and the final learning for the day, I promise. So we've looked at the people, we've looked at the law, we've looked at the policy, we've looked at the money. Finally, let's answer the question. What might a different energy landscape look like? What would a different energy system look like? And what would that entail for us all? For this panel, I'll invite the panelists who are in the room to come to the front. Engineer Jasper Omondi Oduor. We have Charles Wanguhu, Martin Brown Munene, and Robert Damulera. So some are joining us virtually, some are in the room. If you're in the room, please come to the front. If you're joining virtually, the tech team will allow you to unmute yourself and show us your face. All right, thank you for joining me. We can get started on the panel. So on my immediate left is Jasper Omondi, who those who are with us here in Naivasha know, we like to joke that he's a wealth of information, an oracle of some sort. I'll allow him to introduce his document because I feel I wouldn't do him justice. His article is called Demystifying the East African Power Pool, which outlines how the economies of scale allow us to not only pool our resources as a region, but to allow us to have equitable, reliable, and affordable energy in the region. Now, Jasper, before you get started, maybe I'll narrow down your wealth of information to maybe a few key items, maybe just break down the East African power pool in the most basic bare bones way you can, in simple terms, and then maybe we can try and follow the conversation.
Thank you very much. I want to thank especially the Africa Development Bank because they have financed the power pool for the study of the master plan. The purpose of the master plan was to look at all the possible resources within the region and optimize to come up with a power plan where the most least cost project is the one who will be pushed forward for the development and to be connected for the use of the whole of the Eastern Africa region. So the resources that exist within the power pool was such that some countries had excess potential for hydros, some had excess potential for geothermal, some excess potential for gas generation. And considering the different weather patterns for the different regions of the country, those who are dependent so much on hydro, when you had a drought, they will have a problem. And when there's a fluctuation of fuel price, those people who are dependent on thermal and gas, the prices will go up. So the perfect arrangement was to find a good energy mix for the region to take advantage of the economy of scale, the varying weathers, the fluctuation of the prices, to have what you call a good energy mix, to take care of the cost, to take care of the security of the supply, and to take care of a continued availability of supply over a long period of time. So this was the purpose of the power pool, which was started in 2005. And I'm sure by next year, you will see the advantage of the power pool because the connection line between Ethiopia and Kenya would have been finished. The other countries are also being connected. We are already connected with Uganda. The line connecting us to Tanzania is in progress. And the other power pool countries are all connected up. So the power pool has made a lot of progress. There are few problems like coordinating center, the market rules, the operational rules. I think those are the things they are working on to finalize before the power trade starts.
Thank you, Jasper, for demystifying the entire process. You've mentioned we have to have a trading system amongst ourselves. This trading system, according to your article, would be voluntary, yes? And my question to you would be, since the system is voluntary, what happens? What are the catapulting effects when one of the countries decides to back out?
The way it is structured is that the benefits will keep you in, mainly because there are three groups of participants. There are those people who have power and would like to sell. There are those people who don't have power, they would like to buy. And there are those people who are like the highways. The power will pass through their countries. So all countries stand to benefit depending on the season and the situation for that particular time.
So a mutually beneficial regional agreement?
Yes.
Okay, with that, would that come a strict policy on how the benefit sharing would look like the conflict resolution? Because I'm sure conflicts would come up, the conflict resolution and all the subsequent maybe diplomacy issues that could potentially come out later down the line?
Yes, there is a center based in Addis Ababa which handles all these things. And there are different levels of interaction between the countries. There's the utility level. And then after the utility level, there's the ministerial level, at the minister's level. And then, of course, there's at the regional level. And oversight between the interconnection between the two, all the powerfuls in Africa, there's also African Union and NEPAD and all those who are working together to make sure that the whole Africa will be connected in a very amicable and smooth way to operate for the whole of Africa.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful, and I encourage everyone to please read that article. This is the way that the region is going. This is potentially the future for East Africa, and we should all be familiar with what the power pool would look like and what it would mean for our countries. Next up, I'd like to invite a panelist who's joining us online, Robert Damulira, who wrote an article on carbon pricing and REDD+ against climate change. So he examines these trading systems and he walks you through the various options there are, carbon pricing, and within it, he explains the carbon tax as well as the emissions trading system, which is explained in such a way that you don't have to have a 4-year degree to follow. You don't have to have any prior knowledge. You don't have to have any pre-existing information on these systems. He will walk you through step by step. Now, Robert, if you can hear us, can you make an affirmative sound of some sort?
Hi there. My name is Dr. Robert Damulira, and I'm really very excited to be joining you all, even though virtually. First of all, congratulations to everyone who contributed in one way or the other, small or big, to this moment, to completing this energy atlas for Kenya. I personally worked on a piece entitled Carbon Pricing and REDD+ Against Climate Change, where I examined policy options for Kenya. And in this report, basically, I make 2 specific assessments, one on a major global international policy around carbon pricing, so to speak, but also the reduction of emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, what they call REDD+. I used 2 particular exemplars to make this analysis. One is coming for us from the REGI, which is a regional greenhouse gas emission sort of trading scheme here in the United States. And it is, it is covering about 10 states at the moment. It started with 7 a couple of years ago, and now has grown to 10 states. Then for the REDD+ policy, another policy aiming to deal with global climate change, I examine as an exemplar the International Tree Planting Association called TIST, which is operating in many countries across Eastern Africa, with half of its clientele being based in Kenya. So basically what these 2 exemplars teach us is that on one hand, to deal with climate change, we have to solve 2 different sort of emission sources. One is the emission sources from the way we produce electricity across the world, which is predominantly based on fossil fuels. And the policy here is the cap and trade, which REG is an example of. So basically industries, states or nations can set a target, and then within that target can set specific limits for each industry. And then for each of these industries, those that are able to adopt cleaner production technologies, are able to save money and, gain credits, emission credits, which they then trade to those who are unable to adopt cleaner technologies. So the net result is that you have a sector, basically here in the US for Reggie's case, it's electricity production. You have a sector gradually over time reducing the total emissions that are associated with the production of each kilowatt hour of power that is, traded into the grid. The beauty with this particular policy is, first of all, it's regional in nature. So companies may be able to trade these emission reductions with other companies, even if they're in different states. So that regional component is important, allows for flexibility because different states have different incentives, different local sort of regulations, and this is able to sort of create a broader market than if this was just one state. So you are limited for this particular policy in just one state. Now, for the RED plus, the reduction of emissions from degradation and forest, the reduction of emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. We use the TIST example, and the TIST example is basically leveraging a number of international policies that have been crafted around this idea. And basically the idea being both from the United Nations, which are the sort of the mandatory emission reductions that the countries are meant to achieve. And then also you find that, again, similar arrangements work, that northern countries, especially Nordic ones, voluntarily contribute money or at least charge companies money to offset their emissions. And then that money is used to support forest protection, to reduce deforestation, and also forest degradation in the global south. So TIST is leveraging that from the mandatory perspective, but also from the voluntary carbon market. So a number of platforms like the Vera Carbon Standard, WWF Gold Standard, a number of voluntary platforms. So individuals like you and me interested in reducing our emissions are able to sell credits, carbon reduction credits, emission reduction credits through companies like TIST. And then TIST can basically establish programs and projects that are validated by external auditors that actually forest deforestation is reducing, and also forest degradation is reducing among the smallholder farmers. Now, what makes TIST quite unique is the fact that a lot of these sort of emission reduction programs that have to do with forestry are industrial in scale. In other words, bigger is better. Go big or go home, so they say. And as a consequence, those programs have left out smallholder farmers. And you and I know that in countries like Kenya, in Uganda, Tanzania, it's the small farmers that actually produce a lot of the food, control a lot of the forest land, and therefore these mechanisms had failed for many years to bring those small farmers because the cost of aggregation was too much to make a business case. So TIST came up with a methodology using a mixture of artificial intelligence, geographical information systems, a network of farmer groups and staff to be able to aggregate smallholder farmers to form larger units that can then be sold on the global market. So these two exemplars, TIST is a highly successful initiative. It has today over 100,000 farmers within its network that are benefiting. Of course, the challenge is that the farmers are being paid quite small amounts of money. Well, like it's not money that is life-changing, right? And you know, this one could say that could also be a challenge in the global markets, because internationally we don't have a sort of an enforceable, mandatory, legally binding framework to facilitate carbon trading at that level. So perhaps, you know, in future COP27, maybe COP28, we could come up with such a mechanism. And, you know, once that mechanism is important, then you'll see a lot of these initiatives take off. So certainly, you know, I could share more around this, but it would be really very bad of me if I conclude giving you insights from the report without some specific recommendations. So one of the key recommendations that we make in the report is this idea that for initiatives like this to be effective, Kenya needs to think of operating regionally, such that companies that especially within the East African region, as an example, can be able to trade their emission reductions across borders without any hindrances. This would work better by creating a bigger market and attracting bigger players.
Thank you, Robert, for taking the time to communicate. And from what we've seen, Jasper and Robert tell us that boundaries are not a limitation when it comes to energy matters. The region is more important. Going beyond the borders is more important. And these coming together of the countries is what will determine what our energy future will look like. With that, I'll bring in Martin, whose paper touches on transboundary issues of climate change. His article is called Impact of Climate Change on Energy Development in Kenya. And as we all know, climate change and energy matters are interrelated and difficult to separate, and climate change is transboundary. So Martin, before we even go into the concepts that you outlined in your article, you begin by insisting very heavily that data is a challenge. And that's a theme I noticed with majority of the articles. Most of the authors talk of having to resign themselves to the available data or having to make do with what is there. So Martin, your conversation around lack of data, what measures do you think would be most effective in bridging the gap? Do we just fund more research? Do we talk to the stakeholders? What measures do you recommend, and how do you think we can bridge this data gap?
Thank you, Iman. That's a very important question. And I think both of the ways you've mentioned are some of the ways we could improve the availability of data. Or number one, fund more research. Kenya, we fund more politics than science. We need to fund more research. We need to create systems where even data that is available or data that are available can be shared. Even amongst the civil society themselves, people keep data like very, very, very personal. We need to understand that sharing data is important and that we need to develop mechanisms where we can equitably share data for purposes of development. Number two, talking to people is also one way of collecting this data, to understand the aspirations of people, to understand what they think, because how people have thought before may not necessarily tell us how people will think in the future, because people have plans, people learn from their experiences, people learn from others, and so on and so forth. So two things: invest in research, listen more, understand that whatever we are doing, we need to ensure that the investments we are making are future-proof. How do we do that? We do that by creating models that tell us the investments we are making now will be able to stand the future risks and will be able to speak to the opportunities of the future. I think that's, for me, that's very important.
Thank you. So commission more data and get to the grassroots level. Thank you. Now, when it comes to the concepts that you discuss in your article, the impact of climate change on energy, and vice versa, because you do talk about the impact of energy on climate change. So majority of the conversations we have around climate change are always either energy or climate change. Is it a situation of either or could they both develop? Could Jasper's vision of a East African power pool work side by side with mitigating the effects of climate change and adapting to the realities that we're experiencing as a world?
That's an interesting one. So let me start by saying that, and I have said this before, we are where we are now because of the energy is at the center of climate change. The emissions we are talking about, the fossil fuels that we are blaming for the greenhouse gas emissions or concentration in the atmosphere can be traced to the energy systems that we have used in the past. So when you're talking about climate change, you can't talk about climate change just in itself. You have to think of what brought about this climate change. And when we talk about the energy, yes, I understand a lot of people, like, of course, Jasper, as you have talked about, they look at the technical aspect of the energy systems. But think about this way, when you are building a house, you don't just look at the architectural design of that particular house. You also look at where you are building that particular house, the topography, the geography, the environment where you're building that house. And that is what determines what kind of materials you use, how high you raise it, how deep you dig the foundation, and so on and so forth. Now, one of the problems I have seen, and I have highlighted in this paper, is that countries such as ours, we are talking big on energy. We are talking about developing many projects using different forms of energy, or developing those or doing big investments of energy. And there is very little about where we are doing this and whether these investments will stand the test of climate change, the impacts of climate change. Will these investments be able to stand for instance, somebody, the previous speaker talked about the hydropower, for instance, becoming less useful now because the water, he talked about the water is not as available. Now, we continue investing more and more into hydro, for instance. What happens? What informs our choice to invest more in hydro? What will happen here, for instance, in about 10 years or so, or 20 years, or whatever timescale we have, our dams become, less water than they are now. So, in other words, whatever investments we are doing now do not necessarily, they need to address the energy poverty, yes, but they need to be risk informed. They need to be informed not just of the financial risks, which is something I know Funso, Mudoni, and other finance guys around here have talked about. But you also need to understand to what climate risks are these investments exposed to now, or are likely to be exposed to in the near future, medium, and into the distant future. That is something that we need to bear in mind when we are developing our energy investments.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was very comprehensive, and I have questions, but I feel I would be taking up the audience's time. But just a quick one. Climate change is making renewable sources of energy, such as water, be intermittent and unreliable. But the effects of climate change as a result of fossil fuel and dirty energy. So this cyclical reactions, one causing the other, leading to another. Does climate change mean that we may have ruined sustainable energy systems for ourselves, or is there still hope for the future, because we're looking at the future of energy?
Yes, the answer is yes. It means we have done that, but there is hope. We should remain hopeful. We have the technologies that we are developing. We can learn from the future, but we need also to listen to the data. We need to listen to what has happened. We need to listen to what the models are telling us. We need to listen to what the experiences that we have gone through can teach us. And we need to speak more. We need these sectors to speak to one another more. Let there be a dialogue between the climate activists and the engineers and the energy people. We need to break these silos, speak to one another, and that's the only way we can be able to help ourselves going forward.
Thank you, Martin. I feel the room needed that burst of positivity. There is indeed hope, and maybe let's not get too down on ourselves. Now, I'll turn over for our final panelist of the day, Mr. Charles Wanguhu, who will be joining us virtually. Charles wrote an article on tax policy and power generation. The power generation hold off the keys to the future of fossil fuels in Kenya. So this article for me was, I think, one of the most interesting ones, no offense to the rest of the authors as well, because it started off as a very interesting perspective. It talked about how fossil fuels have been incentivized in the country and how the tax policies may seem to encourage the problem instead of disincentivizing or discouraging the problem. So if you can hear me, Charles, if you can hear me, maybe turn on your camera.
I have turned it on. I'll turn it on for a bit, but I'm having challenges with the connection, so I might have to switch off at some point.
Yeah, we can see you and you can hear you. Very good. Okay, thank you for joining us today. Your article on Kenya's ability to exploit its fossil fuels and the direct correlation to its tax policies and how that again leads to another cycle of we incentivize fossil fuels, which again allows them to not be as productive because they're not benefiting as much, which again, we have to, exempt them from tax. And then we're stuck in a loop, and then the lobbyists are yelling on the other side. It's just a very messy and complex situation. Now, a question for you before you get into the complexities of your article, maybe explain to the audience here today and online what stranded assets are, because we've had the word a lot. Maybe explain it to us like we're children, just sans crayons, just to break it down to its very bare basics. What is stranded assets in just a few words?
Yeah, and I tackle that in my paper because I've said that for the oil sector, there's always one key thing that sort of is a key driver of conversation. So before it was peak oil, and now we have stranded assets. And so stranded assets is this idea that we could invest, for example, in the Turkana project. I mean, Talo has said they've invested over $2 billion in the Turkana project. And now the possibility that that project might not go towards production and the ability to get that money back is what is sort of, I mean, in the simplest way, that's what stranded assets are.
Thank you. So I'm sure we've all benefited from that explanation. Now, in your article, you talk about Kenya's tax policy, the Tax Amendment Act 2020, and all these other existing tax policies that may seem to exacerbate the fossil fuel problem in Kenya. Do you feel there's a direct correlation between tax and the protection of these fossil fuel industries in Kenya, or is Kenya's policy really as productive as we claim it is, as progressive, sorry, as we claim it is in terms of renewable energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think your line is slightly different from what I tried to argue in the paper, in a sense, because I say taxation policy is leading to sort of absurd outcomes. So, for example, fuel is now a major source of revenue for government. So we are one of the, sort of highly taxed. I think our fuel at the moment is more expensive than Uganda, even though Uganda passes through Kenya. And so it's the government, there's an incentive for government to, to maximize the revenues on fuel. And so even if you see recently what government has done is that even instead of reducing the tax on fuel once there was public uproar, government has opted to subsidize the Kenyan Mwananchi from the high fuel prices. So at the moment we have a subsidy for fuel, even though it's sort of an absurd policy, because in one sense, the tax, they're just basically giving us back the tax that they're using. And so government is taking this advantage and assuming that the price of oil will come back down. And so they don't want to reduce the tax on fuel because they assume that the price of fuel will come down at some point and they want to benefit from the high taxes. So that's one thing. The second thing on taxation policy is, for example, taxation that limits ability to access cleaner fuels, for example, like LPG. And this is as a direct impact of the current debt situation in Kenya. We've seen an increase of VAT on LPG, increase on VAT on some of renewable energy equipment, for example, some of the panels and that kind of thing. But at the same time, you have an exemption on biofuels. So while you have a sort of a reversal on one hand on things that have sort of, for example, LPG penetration has increased dramatically in the last few years. And that was largely due to a government exemption on that, the VAT. And so now you're seeing VAT back on LPG, but an exemption on biofuels. So cocoa fuel, for example, is benefiting from that, the exemption at the moment. So you might see an increase in biofuel use, but my argument is in the paper, how long lasting is that if at some point the VAT exemption will, again, go back? And so the biggest challenge for people is access to, in terms of access to energy, is affordability. And so people will always switch to whatever is affordable. And so we're having interesting examples, for example, around M-gas. And so we are seeing, for example, the carbon credit scheme being used to surmount the challenge of equipment costs. So you're seeing organizations, I guess like the Safaricoms and some of these bigger corporates, looking towards international mechanisms to subsidize or to surmount one of the biggest challenge, which is, for example, the purchase of the 6 kg LPG, the LPG cylinder. So again, so those are interesting things that are coming out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. I feel the conversation cannot end here. Even for me, I feel I will have to follow up on this conversation and definitely try and understand. I'll definitely read the article several more other times before I'm more conversant with the issues. And I, again, encourage everyone to find the article, read it, digest it, and then shoot an email to Charles if you have a question. So if you have already picked up on some of the issues that have been asked, that have been presented by Jasper, Martin, and Charles, and you have a question, just put up your hand. A final round of questions before we close. Yes.
Yes, I have a question to Martin. Martin, sorry, I'm picking you out. You were talking about impact of climate change in energy development, something on that sort. So I'm asking you this. Should we give credit to climate change to be the main driver to adoption of renewable energy technologies? And to what extent does adoption of renewable energy help solve climate change? The two things are intertwined.
Okay, I'll collect all the questions before I direct them to the panelists. Any other questions in the room? Yes.
Mine is more of a commenter, just to add on what we've heard from, that's in terms of data sharing. Maybe we as the researchers are the main, I'll say we are the drivers of not having the information out there, because you will go to a group, do the focus group discussions, interviews and stuff like that, but still you will need to go back and just highlight on the findings that you have, just have a sit down with them, disseminate the information that you have gathered. So I think as researchers, it is now our role now to take the information out there, because there's a lot that has been done, but no one knows about it. Yeah, so it's a challenge to us now to take it upon ourselves and just disseminate the information to the public.
Thank you so much for that comment. Yes, I completely agree. We need to look inwards. What are we doing? Are we making policy briefs that are easily digestible? Are we making infographics, tweets? Are we making this information as digestible as possible by the common mwananchi for them to uptake it? Thank you so much. Yes.
Same thing with research. My question goes about research is expensive to conduct, especially in Kenya, and sometimes it means funding. So first question, do you guys have something secured for researchers to actually gain funding for research? And how do you get this revenue back for yourselves? Because as you've said, we want to make this information available to people as cheaply as possible, but there's also that capital, quote unquote, for conducting research. So how do you go about that?
Thank you for your question. Any other question? The last question in the room, yes?
Well, thank you. Mine is more of a comment. And I think, the gentleman here can reflect on it. What we are seeing today is a shift from the notion of climate change being a cross-cutting issue to climate change becoming a convergence issue. So in the past, if you wrote a strategy 10 years ago, you see things like climate change and cross-cutting. Today is becoming the convergence issue. So instead of climate change, cross-cutting energy or agriculture, we're now beginning to look at agriculture and energy through the lens of climate change. So they're converging around climate change. Why is that? There's a global momentum for climate change, more than any other subject or issue globally. Number two, there's a huge quantum of resources, financial resources, but also climate change creates a space for partnership, new strategic partnerships, whether around innovation, whether around technology, whether around capacity building, institutional strengthening, north to south, public or private. So there are layers of partnership that we can begin to see. And it's very important for us at policy level to understand this shift. It's not such a thing like it's cross-cutting. No, this is becoming the convergence that is going to become the core of our development going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Pasi, over to you. Are there any questions from the online audience before we start tackling the questions?
Yes, we do have two questions from the online. The first one is from Jesse Nyokabi. So Jesse can go ahead and ask his question, and then we will have Felix Akelo as the last person with a question or comment.
Jesse, Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I wanted to, my question is directed to Martin. My question is, when we talk about the climate change, we also bringing together the idea on sustainability? Because for myself, I would say this is one thing that is no longer an option when it comes to looking at the sustainability and the climate issues, especially when we're talking about the infrastructure setup in the energy sector. So are we talking about sustainability and climate change separately, or we talk about both of them as if they are one thing? That's my question.
Thank you, Jesse. Felix, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Shoot your question.
Yes, my question is I think what one of us also asked, but the issue is we have, for us to solve the issue of climate change and energy and environment, there's the aspect of technology, and whatever positions we are at the moment is there's a disconnect between now the technology part and funding it and how to solve the problems. So my real question is, how do you get to solve this gap where we have technological advances? Because if you look at what you're talking about largely even in this meeting, we're talking about papers available, things that have been done, but we see it's more of what has not been done. For a simple example is the issue of wind. If you look at what has been done and the way that things are changing now globally, then we really can pick on that, but we have to do new studies. How much do we fund that, and how much are we in a position to actually be progressive in terms of our energy agenda development? That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Felix. So since Martin clearly has the biggest crux of the questions, I feel I'll invite Jasper for his question to answer on technology and funding gap. How do we go about solving the challenge between the existing and required technology and the funding that is available and willing to be used on these technologies?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. On technology, for energy, let's go back to the master plan. The technology that is used is looked at depending on the cost, the least cost, as I said, the quickness at which that technology can be brought on board. So there's the cost, there's the complexity, is the quickness at which it can be put on board. These ones play a very important part in looking at that particular technology. The other thing I talked about is because of the climate change, I know in Kenya, there's always what we call LTA, long-term average of rainfalls. All the dams, the rivers feeding into the dams, they are monitored to find out for the last 50 plus years, what has been the flow of water like into the dams. And because of this record of data, having that data available, they can say that doing a hydro on this part of the country would not be the best at this particular time. And that's why when you look at what is considered to be the best load for generation, probably you say geothermal now overtaking hydro because it's becoming more reliable. But sometimes you look at how quick you can bring a project on board, and that's where thermal plants come on. Thermal plants are very quick to bring on board. Hydro takes such a long time. So for a short gap, because thermal plants have a short life, 15 to 20 years, you can quickly put on a thermal plant on board while you are developing your long-term hydros. So these are the kind of things that you have to look at to come up with which technology you are going to use for power generation and at what time. And I think also as technology improves, you can see the shift from big power generation to small isolated power generation of wind and solar is going to come on very quickly. And it's going to be very big challenge to the big techs and the big power generation companies.
Thank you very much, Jasper. I'm sure Felix's question has been answered. Now, Martin, I will read all your questions out to you. You can attack them in whatever order you see fit, and then we can wrap up the day. Martin, a couple of questions first. Are we well placed in putting all the credit to climate change, all our energy issues? Should we place the credit of these issues on climate change? And if so, to what extent do we now say, maybe it's not climate change, maybe it's another issue? Another question that was posed to you is on the cost of research. We may want to fund the research, but where is this money coming from? And what is the cost? What is the return on the investment to the people who are funding the research? And lastly, when we're talking about climate change and sustainability, are they interconnected or are they separated? Go ahead in whatever order you see fit.
Right, great. I will start, I will follow your order more or less. And Eddie Kite, can we give credit to climate change for the clamor for renewable energy? The answer, I would say to a large extent, yes, because it is as a result of the impacts onto the climate change that we have been able to review, to look back and see how our energy systems have been and the impact these energy systems have had on the climate change and how that is affecting on our development pathway. So there is a large extent to which we can say, yes, this changing climate, the global warming has led us to reflect on the energy systems that we have and therefore call for more renewable energy and in the development pathways that we are going to adopt, or the ones that we are implementing. Now, to what extent would adopting renewable energy or upscaling renewable energy help us to solve the problem of climate change? I will say to a good extent. Now, when you look at the science of climate change, why is the climate change becoming a problem now? It is becoming a problem because there is a lot of greenhouse gas emissions which have caused the atmosphere or where we live to warm to the point where things are no longer working for us. Things are becoming more unpredictable in terms of weather. We are seeing a lot of natural hazards happening, and we can relate to all these to the warming, most of this to the warming environment. So if the problem was the greenhouse gas, if you understand the climate change from the point of the concentration of greenhouse gas emissions, if we remove or if we stop emitting these greenhouse gases, then we stop the causes of the problem. So there is extent to which we can say that adopting renewable energy will help us to a great extent to deal with the climate change. But it is not the only way, because there are other emissions which contribute to global warming and climate change, which do not necessarily come from the energy systems. All right. The second person that asked about the capital for research, and this is Elaine. Your question is very relevant. We are asking, where are we getting these monies from? Research has always been funded, and like now we are talking about, all this is research, isn't it? All this is research. We are not talking from some miracle or some wish-wash things. Research has been conducted under this project. And money has been invested. A lot of money has been invested in this. So there is money. The question is, and I think Funzos also talked about money being available to do all these things we want to do. The question is, how do we make the decisions to distribute these resources to what area? When we want to fund research, how are we going to distribute the money that is available to fund health research, COVID vaccines, the energy systems, or the technologies that Jasper is talking about? So money is there, I will say, money is there. The question is, where are our priorities? Where are our priorities? The second question is, there is the extent to which the lack of sharing of data causes us to use more money on the same things, because we duplicate a lot of research questions because somebody funded some research there, it was published and it was never shared with others. Others have the need to answer the same question. They have to look for funding to answer the same question. So if we shared the data, if we collaborated more, if we spoke more, there would be money to address all these research problems or questions we have. And then Jesse, I would say that's a tricky question, but it's a very relevant question, because there is the question of what should be happening and what is happening. So should we, from where I stand, I do not see why we should separate the climate change and sustainability. It doesn't make sense to me. And I don't think anybody who looks at these things critically would really advocate for separating these two things. They are one and the same thing. So it is the onus is upon us to understand. I would understand where Jesse is coming from. Some people understand climate change differently. And there is a publication that was done a couple of years ago by one of my lecturers, Professor Mike Hume. He came up with a book called Why We Disagree on Climate Change. When you read that book, you understand why certain people think climate change is a problem, others think it is an opportunity, others think it is an economic problem, others think it is an environmental problem, others think it is an energy problem, others think that it is a hoax. So if we are to understand climate change for what it is, you would see that climate change has been caused by our lack of adopting or sustainable pathways to development. So putting sustainability at the center of our development will do a lot of good to climate change. And in addressing climate change, we should put sustainability at the center of it. I hope all these, I have been able to answer some of these questions.
Very much,
Thank
yes.
you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to respond to all the questions systematically and so thoroughly. With those very powerful words, I'd like to thank all of you for letting me keep your attention, and the panelists especially for letting me boss them around. I release you. And now with that, I'll hand over to Christos to give us direction on the next steps. And of course, he will guide us on a round of applause for the great panelists.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and those who are joining us virtually. I know you have taken time to sit with us, been patient throughout the day for this exemplary moment, and it's my honor and privilege to finally lead you to the climax of this Energy Futures Dialogue that we had today. Before I do, I just wanted to also invite one special guest who is with us today, who put up what brought us together here today. And her name is Azadi. So in the interest of time, let me straight away go into officially sharing and launching the Kenya Energy Research Compendium, dubbed Energy for What? Contemporary Energy Issues and Dilemmas in Kenya. I hope you can see it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe each and every one of you have got a copy. And for online guests, I don't know if Percy, Arthur have any final words. You're muted, Percy.
You're kind of waiting for me. Wow, what can I say? Guys, congratulations and thanks very much, Azadi and Crispus, for taking the time to shepherd what were a bunch of Microsoft Word documents and Excel graphs into what is hopefully going to be a publication that is going to inspire us to learn more and to engage with the sort of energy and passion we've seen this afternoon on the conversations around energy. I know it's been a very, very long day, so I don't want to say too much other than just say thank you very much to all of you, to all the panelists, to all the participants at Lake Naivasha Safari Lodge, those of us who have joined virtually. And I have enjoyed thoroughly the conversations. I think they have proven one thing, that there is a conversation that needs to continue going on, that needs to continue happening. And, those of us at SID, I think we will do our best to continue to create spaces and opportunities for these conversations to happen. So for us, the journey is not over with the launch of this publication. I think it is beginning, and we will be planning to go forward with this and continue the work of the Energy Reference Group and the dialogues to see how we can get to the goals that we set out in the beginning. So as we reach the end of the year, I wish you all the very best as you go on. I know it's been a very long year for many of us. And I look forward to meeting you all in the new year and to engaging with you, hopefully in person and with the same energy, vigor, and zeal that you have demonstrated today. So thank you very much. Godspeed and all the best.
Thank you so much. Crispus, I wonder whether you can show us a copy of the book. Do you have a what does it look like as we share the link?
Please zoom in on the
chat.
Yeah, that's how it looks like on the front. Very colorful, I think, as well inside, and very informative as well. Not only color. Yeah, it's a good book.
Great. So for our virtual participants, we'll just be sharing the link onto the chat box so that you can download a virtual copy of it. So in a minute or so, we will have that with you. Thanks. And thank you, everybody. Congratulations again. Back to you on the.
Thank you, Percy and Arthur. And also let me also extend that for our virtual participants, we'll have the link on the chat box and on our main site, sid.net. You can find the e-copy of it. So we'll share the details on the chat box as well. And on Twitter, on our social media as well, we'll also place links there. Thank you.
We need more final words. I don't know what more final words there are, except let's go have a drink. Yeah, and thanks to everyone for coming, for being online, and for all the work you put in to making this a very beautiful book. And let's hope it's readable and useful.
Okay, guys. Good evening, everyone. I want you to raise that book and just feel the weight of that book. Can you feel that weight? All that is knowledge. It's not just the weight, but you need to go through these books because we're going to be doing dialogues around the topics that are in here come next year. So we'll be inviting you to engage on some of the dialogues that are in here. So for the final words as we close this retreat, I want to thank everyone for availing themselves and coming to Naivasha and joining for our retreat. Everyone who has joined us virtually, thank you so much for joining us and contributing to our engagements. And we thank you, and we hope you can be able to access the book and be able to contribute more on our conversations as we go on. So as we finish, we're going to have a group photo so that we can have our book, a memory of when we launched the book. So kindly don't leave. We'll have a group photo before we leave. So thank you all and have a good evening. And bye, virtual audience. See you later. Bye, Pasi. Bye, Arthur.
Betty gonna duaga, Betty gonna yoka pango kana window. Mina ringo chiro, nithindo kuecho. Betty gonna see me, Betty gonna yoka wacho. Dinyo tuo timo buru, mine chiro la lengwen. Chiengrenya ora tuo, long ni di bena onge to diti mangoja bere awa.